Majority Report with Sam Cedar.
The destiny of America is always safer in the hands of the people than in the conference rooms of any elite.
Sam Cedar.
They are unanimous in their hate for me, and I welcome their hatred.
We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
The Majority Report with Sam Cedar.
Ever get the feeling you've been cheated?
It is Monday, January 27th, 2020. My name is Sam Cedar. This is the 5-time award-winning Majority Report. We are broadcasting live steps from the industrially ravaged Gowanus Canal in the heartland of America, downtown Brooklyn, USA. On the program today, Bolton's book leaks, creating a nightmare scenario for vulnerable Republican senators. Meanwhile, Igor Fruman's surreptitious audio recording reveals the insanity that is the Trump administration. Latest polls show a massive surge for Sanders as the DNC builds a firewall. Kobe Bryant and his 13-year-old daughter and 7 others die in a helicopter crash. And as Donald Trump's defense team flails, senators decide soon whether witnesses will be called. Meanwhile, Jared Kushner reportedly has worked out the details of his Israeli-Palestinian peace plan, so that's good. Tennessee now provides legal protection for adoption agencies which discriminate against gay people. Pentagon says 34 troops suffered traumatic brain injuries in the Iranian strike. The CIA used a prisoner as a torture training prop. And lastly, a former Salvadoran general admits that the U.S.-backed military committed the massacre at El Mozote. Mozote. All this and more on today's program. And sitting in today, helping us out, is Nomiki Konst.
You did it!
Of the Nomiki Show. Nomiki, how are you?
I'm doing great, Samuel.
It's Samuel is actually the way I pronounce it. Yes. Thanks for stopping in and hanging with us. And your show,
Yes.
when is it launching?
It launched this weekend
It's
on
on.
Patreon.
Okay.
And it is now on YouTube the full show is on YouTube, in visually everything. It's up there right now as of this
Visually?
morning. Video.
Okay.
I'm learning the lingo, okay?
I understand, right? Video.
It's not the audio.
Surprise visual album, okay? She pulled a Beyonce.
It's
did,
all holographic material.
It's all a hologram right here in your studio. Do you see the new technology?
Okay. So what is the Patreon address?
So the Patreon address is www.patreon.com/The Nomiki Show. Nomiki. And we have all the different kinds of memberships starting at $9, going all the way up. I mean, you can
To $1 million.
To $1 million.
Right.
You could just fund the show for life. And I'm excited because we released the first show and some extras as well for Patreon members. And I'm going to be releasing a few more extras this week, interviews that I've done in the last couple of days, and some takes. We're going to be discussing the DNC here, but I'm saving the good stuff for my show.
Of course. Oh, I'm used to that dynamic. Believe me. All right, that's great. So we'll put a link in the podcast description today. With so much news, it's nuts. Obviously, the Bolton story. We're going to get to that. That is massive in terms of, and I don't want to get into it now, but I think everybody who listens to the show on even a semi-regular basis realizes that for me, impeachment has always been about the Democrats taking back the Senate. And in that regard, I think we have reached the peak efficacy that impeachment could be in that respect. And I should just reiterate, that's political. I mean, I think we need to hold powerful people to account. I think there should have been a half dozen other things that we impeached Donald Trump over. And but we got a story of the CIA using one of the prisoners that they had back in the early aughts as basically a training guide on how to torture people. And frankly, since everybody's convened, let's impeach the Bush administration and those war criminals from there. But we will get to all that in just a moment. But first, over the weekend, right? Was it over the weekend, the March for Life? And
I missed it, sadly.
Yes, you did miss it. I'm not surprised by that. It is the first time in history that a U.S. president has appeared at the March for Life. I don't need to tell you, Nomi, that a woman's right to choose in this country has been abrogated. It is, for practical purposes, gone within maybe a half a dozen states at this point. From a practical standpoint, I mean, you could still cross lines, state lines, and get an abortion in other states, or if you have the opportunity to travel X amount of miles and you're wealthy, it's there. But for many people, many women who are living in poverty or simply don't have much means, this right has been abrogated, and the Supreme Court is allowing now trap laws and a whole host of ways in which this right's being curtailed. And the Supreme Court, as it's constituted now, we may see them continue to infringe upon that right, if not overturn it completely. But here's Donald Trump. And this dynamic is the one that I think explains his ability to become president in 2016, which is that the right, the self-identified evangelical Christians, who we know a significant portion of them don't even attend church. It is an identity. It is an identity. It's a tribal identity that is not necessarily defined by any actions or even beliefs necessarily, at least in the context of Christianity. However, they understand that on the cultural level, Donald Trump is not necessarily one of them, but he's going to do their bidding, and he has proved it. And he has delivered in a way that I think, frankly, no other Republican president has delivered so specifically on this amount. He had a list from the Heritage Foundation of judges he was going to appoint. He's appointed every single one of them and more because he doesn't care.
Yeah.
And his complete lack of shamelessness is a huge strength of him here, because he can say this in such a way that it gives the evangelical Christians a plausible deniability about who the guy really is.
Right.
Here he is, one-on-one on Fox News. Who's this guy? Do we know who the interview? We don't know. Just a nameless Fox drone.
I'll chime in for that part.
And, do you know who he is?
Probably. I don't know who it is yet.
It's that guy in the blue.
This guy.
Yeah.
Oh, he fills in for Laura Ingraham.
There you go.
I forgot his name.
That guy. And here he is interviewing the president about that moment when the president came to be pro-life.
They were saying you elevated this movement and that you made them feel included. Others are saying you're doing this for politics. It's an election year. When was the moment when you went from pro-choice to pro-life? Was there a moment?
Well, it was, and there was a specific moment, and it was quite a while ago, but it was something that's turned out to be even more, I think probably even more of a truth than I would have thought at the time. but it's just an honor to be here today. You know, they have tens of thousands of people outside too, Raymond.
Yeah.
So this was their all-time record, and I think they beat it by a lot. And incredible people. They're just incredible people.
It's Raymond is the guy's name, apparently. And that's his, not only was it a specific moment, but it's even gotten more true, that moment.
I thought it was when Melania was pregnant with Barron. Like, he's told this story before. He just forgot it.
I couldn't remember.
Oh, yeah, that's
good
it.
for you.
Thanks,
Yes,
Jamie.
right, exactly. That was the moment. And that moment's gotten more true as he's grown taller.
There was a
when God
moment, it
told
was
me.
specific. It was a specific moment, and it meant a lot to me, Raymond. Raymond Arroyo, by the way.
Arroyo, yes. That.
Raymond Arroyo, there he is.
When God told him that he was supposed to reign over this country, because every Republican president has said that at one moment God spoke to him, and because they're all men, and that he was going to be president. I mean, George W. Bush did this, and of course this is evangelical speak, because I think one way that they can release themselves from their conscience is by saying, well, this was God's choice.
Redemption. Yes. Redemption and God's choice. And I mean, I think with Bush, I think he's actually legit.
Right.
At least in the context of Christianity. I mean, obviously Trump is lying. He doesn't care. I think that to the extent that he has any, and that's fine. I mean, it's being, I wish we had politicians on the left who have no emotional attachment to any of it, but deliver the specifics that we want in terms of the policy. I don't care if Joe Biden got up there and said, you know what? Last night, FDR showed up at the edge of my bed and he said, expand Social Security and Medicare for all. And I looked at Bernie's proposal and I don't think it goes far enough. I think we need to do more. And that's on day one. That's what I'm going to do. And somebody said, when did that moment happen? He goes, the other day.
It's gotten truer.
And if 3 years into his presidency, we could say like, wow, he did it. I'd be like, God bless. I mean, I don't care. And, but with that said, we're talking about a political program, not something that's supposedly based upon some type of personal morality, which ostensibly we hear and have heard, of this moral preaching for decades now.
The one thing that is confusing for me is, didn't Donald Trump just get a bunch of pushback from evangelical leaders in, I forgot which publication. It was like an evangelical publication, and they all, the editorial.
Christianity Today or something like that?
Yeah.
I think that's an outlier.
It's an outlier. Okay. But it was powerful. It was like the most read publication, and they had said, we're not supporting this man or whatever it
right.
is.
But, they're not.
It's old news.
Exactly. It's old news. And, we only follow one leader. Donald Trump. So they're not going to listen to that.
Our Lord and Savior, Donald Trump.
Folks, postage rates, they've gone up again. Thankfully, Stamps.com eases the pain with big discounts off post office retail rates. With Stamps.com, you save 5 cents off of every first-class stamp and up to 40% off shipping rates. That's pretty good. And that kind of savings, of course, adds up in this environment, especially for small businesses. Well, I don't do it anymore because I ran out. But when we first launched this show, I would ship out DVDs to people.
Oh my gosh.
And it was exhausting.
Of what?
Of movies I had made back in the day, and great. I had my kid stuff the envelope. It became like basically that was what the family did.
Yeah.
And by the end of that, I became aware of Stamps.com and got all my postage basically at home because it was just getting too nuts. But then I ended that whole thing. But I got to tell you, Stamps.com, it saves time, it saves money. And anything apparently now that you can do at the post office, you can do at Stamps.com. You can personally print official U.S. postage 24/7. Get up at 3 a.m. I didn't mail that letter. Oh my God, I need a stamp. I'm going to print it out. I'm going to run down to the mailbox.
You can stop violating child labor laws.
There you go. You could, exactly. I could, my kids do this at any time of the day. Any package, any class of mail for anywhere. Once your mail is ready, you just drop it in a mailbox. With Stamps.com, you get discounted postage rates that you can't even get at the post office. They buy so much postage. It's a fraction of the cost of those expensive postage meters that you see at a law firm or something like that. Right. I don't know. There's no equipment to lease. There's no long-term commitments. Over 700,000 small businesses already use Stamps.com. Right now, our listeners get a special offer that includes a 4-week trial plus free postage and a digital scale without any long-term commitment. Just go to Stamps.com, click on the microphone at the top of the homepage, and type in Majority Report. That's the name of this program, Majority Report. That's Stamps.com. Enter Majority Report. Check it out.
That'd be great for campaigns. If we send out literature.
Yep. Direct mail.
Running for office.
There you go.
A lot of people know. So.
There you go. Also, Daniel Miskowitz is a real ZipRecruiter customer who used ZipRecruiter to hire for his company Cafe Altura. And the following is a testimonial script based on his employer story. Wow. This is crazy. Altura, well, it's not that crazy. I mean, look, I'm one of these people too. I don't know why I don't get featured in these. Have we heard whether or not Brendan came from ZipRecruiter.
Oh.
He wasn't working for ZipRecruiter. That's where I found him.
You found him.
Well, he found me. That's one of the things that's amazing about ZipRecruiter. It's not only is it a online resource where you can organize applications as they come in and resumes, etc. They go out and basically pull people into the system. As far as Miskowitz, this Dylan Miskowitz from Cafe Altura, he experienced how challenging hiring can be after unsuccessfully searching for a director of coffee for his organic coffee company. I don't even know what a director for coffee is. And then he switched to ZipRecruiter and he saw an immediate difference. And you can too by signing up for free at ZipRecruiter.com/majority. ZipRecruiter finds candidates for you, and its technology identifies people with the right experience and invites them to apply to your job. You get qualified candidates faster. After posting his job to ZipRecruiter, Dylan said he was amazed by how quickly great candidates were applying and found his new director of coffee in just a few days. I literally had a half a dozen people who I thought were awesome. Brendan was just slightly more, a lot more awesome, I mean. With results like that, it's no wonder why 4 out of 5 employers who post on ZipRecruiter get a quality candidate within the first day. ZipRecruiter, it's the smartest way to hire, and you can see why ZipRecruiter is effective for businesses of all sizes. Try ZipRecruiter for free at our web address, ZipRecruiter.com/majority. That's ZipRecruiter.com/majority. Majority, MAJORITY. ZipRecruiter.com/majority. And lastly, Nomi, I don't know if you've known me long enough to know me, since, right?
Know me.
To have known me back when I didn't have the style that I have now in terms of my clothes. But
I did watch you.
What's that?
If I didn't know you, I watched you.
Well, my style is upgraded over the past couple of years. I would describe my style as understated. I don't know exactly.
Before or now?
Well, now.
Okay.
Now, and practical, not too show. I don't know what it would be. Daddish. It's very hard for me to shop, but I have found a new and I think what's going to be a highly successful way. Stitch Fix.
Oh yeah.
It's a personal styling service that delivers your favorite clothing, your favorite shoes, your accessories directly to you. This is how it works. First, you do a style profile. Then they have an expert stylist who will send you hand-picked box based on your preferences. Mine's right over there. They have men's boxes, they have kids' boxes, they have women's boxes. There's no subscription required. You can pick between automatic shipments or only getting new pieces on demand. The shipping, exchanges, and returns are always free. They charge you $20 towards the styling fee, but it's you claw that back when you buy your first piece of clothing. So I got my first box. I would say about 50% is spot on. There's a pair of pants. Where are those pants from again? I don't remember. I'm sorry.
Do
but
any of you
nice.
know about his clothing?
And they're right there. I left them out there so I could remember. These things work for me, which is pretty rare. Flag and Anthem. I hadn't heard of them before. I mean, I'm not terribly savvy when it comes to clothes.
Do they go to stores? Like, how does
I don't know how they do it.
So interesting.
And but I also got a pair of desert boots in there, which I think are going to work for me. They're like, I don't know. They're like sort of like they're boot shoes. I mean, I'm not that savvy about this stuff, which is nice. Then there was 2 other things in there that I was like, no. But the easy thing, you send it back. I'm going to try round 2. You can get started today at stitchfix.com/majority. Get 25% off when you keep everything in your box. That's stitchfix.com/majority for an extra 25% off when you keep everything in your box. Check it out if you have the same debilitating problems as I do when it comes to shopping and going. I get panic attacks when I go into
especially like living in a
stores.
city. It's just like such a thing to go to the store and carry the bags and be around all the people and the heat and the noise. I mean, all the stores in everywhere are so loud.
Yeah. I get overwhelmed.
Yeah.
There's too many things and I don't like any of it, and I don't like it goes back to my childhood. I'll talk about that another day. But
Okay.
all right, let's get into this. The big story in terms of impeachment, and as we speak, I think today is, if I'm not mistaken, is Alan Dershowitz.
Yes.
He's going to get up for an hour and he is going to talk about how the Constitution says you cannot impeach a president for abuse of power. And of course, it's completely contrary to what he said in the past. He's pretending he's not working for the president. He is. This is Alan Dershowitz doing his best to keep at arm's length. But meanwhile, this story about it's the John Bolton thing that is going to make this difference. I mean, from the beginning, I have never thought that Donald Trump could be thrown out of office unless there was actual video of him naked running around the front lawn of the White House chasing a small boy. That is the only circumstance where I believe that it is possible for him not only to be impeached, he has been impeached now, but impeached and removed from office.
He hired Alan Dershowitz just in case he needed to be protected from chasing a small boy.
It's a twofer.
Yes.
Yeah, even then they'd probably find a way to rationalize it.
I think it would be close. I think it would be close, but it depends on how explicit the video is. If it was grainy in any way, I think you're right. Fake news. But the real issue in terms of impeachment are a half a dozen senators, Tom Tillis, both the senators in Georgia, particularly the new one, Joni Ernst, Martha McSally, I said it right, finally. Obviously, Susan Collins, Cory Gardner. I think, who else do we have? Joni Ernst, Tom Tillis. I mean, those are the big ones right there. Tom Tillis is polling poorly against his rival. Susan Collins is in deep trouble. Cory Gardner is in deep trouble. Joni Ernst may be having some problems. Martha McSally is going to have some problems, I think. Those folks in Georgia could very well have some problems. We just lost the progressive challenger in that race, sadly, in the primary for lack of funding. But
it's crazy.
This is going to make it even harder.
Right.
Because apparently John Bolton's book, the publisher had announced it's coming out March 17th, which is 2 days after most of the filing deadlines for primaries against these senators. They are jammed up. They're going to vote to exonerate the president. That's going to happen no matter what. The real question is, can they afford to vote for witnesses? I think let's listen to what Mitt Romney says here, because Mitt Romney is a guy who is the only one, I think, maybe Lamar Alexander because he's retiring, but
he's so close to Mitch McConnell.
But it's also, here's the other thing that's operative here. Well, we'll talk about that in a second. Let's do Mitt Romney.
It's increasingly apparent that it would be important to hear from John Bolton. I, of course, will make a final decision on witnesses after we've heard from not only the prosecution but also the defense. But I think at this stage it's pretty fair to say that John Bolton has a relevant testimony. I think it's increasingly likely that other Republicans will join those of us who think we should hear from John Bolton.
Those of us.
Now, this is interesting because Lamar Alexander, Susan Collins, Lisa Murkowski's not in danger, but she has a brand to maintain, and she's already had her issues with the Republican Party, right? She went in as a write-in. He has been meeting with them. All they need is 4 votes. Mm-hmm. And it's quite possible that the witnesses come in. And if the witnesses come in, I think what they're going to do is they're going to put John Bolton behind a closed-door session. Mm-hmm. They're going to keep his deposition secret.
Right.
They're gonna avoid the whole thing, and that's it. But the problem they have is that John Bolton comes out 3 weeks later, and they can say that he's lying.
Yeah.
But
you mean comes out on TV and just gives his version, or?
Yeah, when he's going around with his book.
Yeah.
2 months later, and he's going to say, this is what I said in those hearings.
Exactly. And he's and what people don't understand about John Bolton, he's crazy.
He's a nut.
He loves TV and just says, if you think Trump's crazy, different kind of crazy.
And let's remember, this guy was all over Fox News.
Right, exactly.
It's going to be very hard to sort of scrub the existence of this guy. But here's the other thing. I think someone like Tom Tillis, I think someone like Joni Ernst, I think someone like maybe even Cory Gardner, although that's arguable, they're not going to vote for witnesses. They're just going to go down with the ship, because if they're looking at a situation where they're going to lose either way.
Right.
Because if they abandon Trump, or Trump decides that they didn't do what Trump wants, they're going to attack him and they're going to lose, then they're screwed out of any sort of post-political or post sort of political entrepreneurial.
Right.
They want to go back and lobby their friends. And if they are, if they're toxic and Donald Trump wins again, they're in big, big trouble.
Well, they can join MSNBC as contributors.
That's the only option that they'll have at that point. But I don't think Tom Tillis, they would have to completely do a 360 at this point,
right,
or 180. But isn't that the calculation, do you think, that they're doing?
I think one factor that plays into this is, McConnell holds the funds too. And so he knows very well that in order to keep the Senate in place, he has to balance out, it's like light pressure. It really does come down to Mitch McConnell and what he's pressuring them to do, and knowing very specifically the polling down to the counties, down to the precincts, where the audiences are, the voters are on this topic. It's not an easy calculus at the end of the day. He has to appear strong, McConnell. He has to appear like the Republican Party is in unity. I think what you're saying about holding the witnesses behind closed doors is the safe path for him, and the safe path for all of them, including Lamar Alexander, who of course is leaving.
It's the least painful.
It's the least painful. And Collins, at the end of the day, as independent as she appears to be, she often votes in line.
Always.
Right.
Always, unless it's completely meaningless.
So why are we even having a conversation about her if
Well, I think the bottom line is just this, is that there is, in all of these states, I don't think they're swing voters in the context necessarily of a presidential election.
Right.
But they want their senator to show a certain amount of independence, which is why they can justify voting for Trump.
That's right.
And they are those conservatives that you may have met that, were sort of maybe Jeb Bush conservatives who listen to NPR and think that they're getting both sides of the story because I'm listening to NPR. And those are the people that I think are going to abandon these Republican senators. They'll still vote for Trump, I think, for the most part.
Isn't that crazy?
But I think the idea is that I want a divided government. I want to make it seem like I'm, so as long as I get my tax cuts, I can still sort of play this off. I have a feeling, that's basically who we're talking about. And that's also, I think, why the Democrats have been, and I found it distasteful, frankly, but so not full on jingoistic, but pretty jingoistic in some of their, their approaches to this. The militaristic aspects of Ukraine. But it'll be fascinating to see how they handle this over the next couple of days, because they just destroyed literally dozens of Republican senators' arguments. Like, there's no one who's heard specifically that the president had a quid pro quo.
This is amazing.
John Bolton and Mick Mulvaney have. In fact, the
March 17th, the book comes out?
The book now, it's just been announced. It's coming out March 17th.
That's 2 months before the Georgia primary. March, April, May. Yeah, May.
Do you think it's going to have any implication in terms of like of the Democratic primary race? I don't see why it would at this
I don't
point.
think so at all. I mean,
unless Joe Biden gets subpoenaed, right. Because they could subpoena him, 51 votes, and then there's going to be pressure on him to show up, I think.
I mean, that won't affect the primaries for other for Joe Biden, of course, but in terms of Senate races and other races, I don't think it'll affect.
No. So here are the sort of the big, supposedly, at least this is according to the New York Times, and it's unclear who leaked this. The manuscript was sent to the White House to be vetted for stuff that was sensitive, in terms of national security. The lawyer, the Times, the lawyer said that the manuscript was sent there. The Times implies that people have seen different drafts, which are different than the manuscript, right? Like, that's not the final version. And so it's unclear where this is coming from. But
did he write this with somebody else? I can't imagine. John
did he?
Bolton. Yeah, he had a.
I'm sure he had a ghostwriter. If it's not, co-credited, I don't know. But apparently it says that one, in an August meeting with Bolton, Trump said he didn't want to release the aid until Ukraine sent all the documents pertaining to Hillary and Biden. Now, here's the thing. This also, we heard the Igor Fruman tape. You start to get the sense that Donald Trump is just an idiot lunatic.
Yeah.
And it's unclear if it depends on what your definition of lying is. But with
intent, with, awareness that he may think he's not breaking the law because he doesn't understand the law.
He doesn't, but which is no defense, but it's more like you can hear people around the table basically showing that this guy, it's really the last person who speaks to him.
Right.
And you could tell him anything. And if you were the last person to say it, and with some conviction, he'd just be like, okay. It's fascinating.
Yeah.
And terrifying to hear the level of conversation that's happening around this table. It's a fundraising, apparently Jack Nicholson's grandson was there too. They're all talking about golf. It's very weird. Anyways, in a meeting about the aid, Trump wanted to release, Ukraine wanted all the documents. He wanted all that. Mike Pompeo, apparently, according to Bolton, told him that he knew that the allegations against Marie Yovanovitch were false. He believed that Rudy may have been pursuing another agenda when he floated them as a way of getting rid of Yovanovitch, because what's clearly happening is it turns out that Parnas and Fruman knew Trump enough to be sitting in that room before they started working with Rudy Giuliani, which basically is consistent with my theory that you had mobsters trying to get rid of Yovanovitch because they wanted to keep a dirty prosecutor there. And Rudy just was getting paid. Like, they're his clients insofar as that, like, they've hired Rudy to orchestrate all this stuff with Trump. It's unbelievable.
This is the guy who RICO'd the city in the early 80s and, imprisoned all the mobsters pretty much in New York.
All the mobsters.
I shouldn't say that. All the Italian mobsters. He's a self-hating Italian.
All the Italian mobsters.
All the Russians out.
Which opened the door for a lot of Russian mobsters.
Bada bing, bada boom.
I mean, and someone just put up an old Wayne Barrett story on Twitter that showed that charges against Trump just died in Rudy Giuliani's office.
Yes.
But back in the day. But so Pompeo knew that Yovanovitch was being set up. And apparently Bolton told Bill Barr that Bill Barr was mentioned in the July call to Zelensky. Bill Barr has claimed that he only learned about that in August. So Bolton is throwing all these people under the bus.
Well, Barr's so loyal to Trump.
Yes. And according to Bolton, Mick Mulvaney was on at least one call with Rudy Giuliani. So Mick Mulvaney knew what was going on. He gets thrown under the bus. And apparently Bolton, Pompeo, and Mark Esper all told Trump to release the aid almost a dozen times. This is according to Bolton. So this stuff is incredibly damning. And nobody's issued any denials.
This is so crazy. So let's think about how this came about. He must have written this when? Before the impeachment? Or, I mean, of course, there's several versions, but...
Well, he was jettisoned like 4 months ago. Right? 4 or 5 months ago. The impeachment started 3 months ago, essentially. So he's been writing it for the past 4 months.
So,
but everybody must have known this
during
story.
The process. But he's basically introducing himself to the impeachment trial.
He's trying. He's been trying. I mean, he announced a week or two ago that he would, if he was subpoenaed by the Senate, he would come and talk. And it is nuts. It's nuts. Now, I should also add, I wouldn't trust John Bolton with anything. I don't think he's lying about this stuff. I just think that his agenda is different from you and I. But use him as a lever to get a Democratic Senate. I'm all in favor of that. That's basically my thinking there. It's nuts. It's absolutely nuts. And we're going to find out in the next couple of days as to whether the Republicans, I mean, I think it's super dangerous for them not to vote to have witnesses. I think they're going to vote to have witnesses. They're going to hide Bolton. They're going to ride that out. And I think they must realize like they're going to lose the Senate. The question is by how much? Right? I mean, it's one thing to lose 3 or 4 seats, or I guess if you lose 3, that's it, right? And 4 seats you got to lose. But if they lose 6 or 7, and meanwhile, just to remind everybody, Chris Coons is building the machine in which he's going to sell out all the Democrats. He is working right now on his gang of whatever it's going to be. And so they're going to come out. It's going to be him and somebody else. He's going to try and weasel in there and get credit for this witness deal. And he's going to start to forge this transpartisan alliance, which is only going to be operable if a Democrat takes the White House, and particularly if the Democrats take the Senate. He is going to be the Joe Lieberman. He's going to put himself right in the middle of the fulcrum of this, and he's going to sell us out. And he's going to do it with, I don't know if he's going to do it with Mark Kelly, or if he's going to do it with Hickenlooper or Manchin or Kristen Sinema. I mean,
that's
the only question is which one of those are going to finally say like, oh, wait a second, maybe I'm progressive again because I'm no longer in the mix of deciding, one of the powerful ones.
Well, it's not going to be Sinema because Sinema took that turn. I mean, she ran as the most progressive state legislator in Arizona and for Congress, and literally became the most conservative member.
Who knows? Because this is all about, with these senators, it's all about putting themselves in a position where they have as much power in the Senate as they can get.
Right.
And for some of them, and it's also a function of what's happening in their state in terms of Trump. So Manchin, I don't think he can move.
Right.
Really. Even if he wanted to. I don't think he wants to. I think he's, I don't know if he's literally a corporate criminal, but one could describe him like that and not be, be in the general ballpark.
Can you imagine if there was a progressive, I mean, I know that Paula Jean Swearingen is run against him, but somebody who had media attention, like a Cynthia Nixon of West Virginia, that could run a progressive that could run against Manchin, because he is not working class, and is the second that's exposed in a massive way in West Virginia, he becomes tremendously vulnerable.
There's a guy named Stephen Smith, I think his name is, who is running a fascinating campaign for the governorship, I think, there in West Virginia. And if he wins, I think that'll be the beginning of the end of the Joe Manchins.
Right.
Because it will create a template. I mean, there's so many things that are up in the air right now that are just nuts. I want to talk about, when we go in the fun half, I want to promise people we're going to talk about the appointments that Tom Perez has made to the DNC, and pick up on this conversation that we keep having to punt because of the enormous amount of... I don't think I have to convince
you anymore. I think it happened.
Well...
I think you got it.
This time around...
Yeah.
This to me looks
this happened last time, by the way. This happens...
The same...
They do, yes. This happens every single time.
All right, well, we'll talk about that. Yeah. We'll talk about that.
Teaser. Stick around.
And we should just... there's just so much news here that it's sort of nuts. Let's just briefly talk about, what's happening right now in Iowa. I saw a tweet last night from a political reporter who said that they've been covering Iowa since 2000. And I guess there was a rally in Ames, AOC and Bernie Sanders. And they said they've never seen that kind of turnout, that Bernie had 1/4 of the crowd 6 months ago.
Wow.
And they had never seen a turnout like that at a rally. There is, I want to talk to you about all of this, obviously, but the polling is starting to show, like, we're getting poll out of poll. We're showing Bernie pulling away in Iowa and New Hampshire.
He's running with it right now.
One never knows.
Right.
But they apparently have asked, the Sanders campaign has asked volunteers to stop making phone calls from out of state into Iowa.
Yeah, it's amazing.
Because they were supposed to do 5 million. They've done 7 million.
Right.
And they now want people to stay in their home states, particularly if your primary is in March.
Yeah.
And start to go door to door.
Yep. If there's an office in your state, we don't have one in New York yet.
The texts I've been getting from Bernie have been a little different lately. At first, it was like, I'm pulling up. I'm coming from behind. Give me some money, Jamie. And now it's like, let's keep the momentum going.
Yeah.
We're doing great.
They should have audio. They should have like a system. There should be a way to do an audio text.
Oh, that's interesting.
That would be helpful to
I can hear his voice in my head.
Yeah, you don't need an audio because you're right. Everybody knows his voice.
I'm not opening a MP3 from some number I don't know.
That's true. Yeah.
No way.
Also, it's
voicemail maybe.
You can't do that through the texting programs. You can't send, from what I understand, because we use those for our campaign. And I was like, oh, send a video or send a this. And they're like, yeah, we can't do that. We can only send this many words and tell people to RSVP to something.
Well, I'm going to get an app for my phone that reads all my texts in the Bernie voice. So then that'll solve the problem.
Can you do that?
Probably.
Do you remember when the GPS system hired Snoop Dogg to do one of the voices that was, available on your car 5 years ago?
I remember they were doing stuff like that. I don't know why they don't do more of that.
That's... You know what? Special perk. I will read your text for you for a month if you subscribe.
Careful. Careful what you wish for with those
fine
things.
Print.
But here, I think this is the problem that Joe Biden's having. I mean, Joe Biden seems to be I don't know if you could say he's cratering, but it feels like it. He is dropping to, tied more or less for third in a couple of these polls, maybe close to fourth in some. What? Go ahead.
So there's a little hot take. This is not my hot take, and I don't know if I can contribute it, but I'll ask the person later if I can contribute. I'm on a forum. Very smart analysis. In Iowa, Buttigieg's support is very soft, and Biden is the main second choice given an electability screen. Biden could pick up a ton in the caucuses because of the perceived strength against Trump, which is scary to him because in his mind, Biden's very plausibly the weakest in general, obviously. And so he breaks down the polling because this is the poll that came out, New York Times poll, I think.
The Times Siena
poll that came out a couple days ago. That's why we have to pay attention to these second choices and these, electability numbers. And that's why it's so important that Bernie has such a strong lead. And
right.
It can't just be a couple points. He has to have like 10%.
If Biden comes in second, it's I don't want to say it's a problem, but it's
a delegate problem.
It's a problem.
Yeah.
Because he needs to be thrashed, I think, to dislodge the foundations of his support in South Carolina.
Yep.
And in Texas, I think, to a certain extent, too, where it's just sort of like built upon this notion that he is the guy who can beat Trump.
The weakness needs to be perceived by
He needs to be
exactly voters.
Because it's not like, Bernie could come in fourth and he's not going to lose his base.
Not at all. Yeah. They might get more fired up. People
right. Because their support for him is founded upon other things. I think that's true of Warren to a certain extent. Mm-hmm. I think Buttigieg is also sort of soft in that way. Mm-hmm. But Biden, more than any of them, I think, like, if he comes in third or fourth in Iowa, if he comes in fourth in Iowa and third in New Hampshire, let's say.
Right.
If he comes in third in New Hampshire, third in Iowa and fourth in New Hampshire, I think he's got some problems. I think it's like, from the perspective of people who don't want Biden, obviously fourth in Iowa is best case scenario, because then that'll affect where he is in New Hampshire and so on and so on. So,
like, how is he supposed to beat Donald Trump when he can't even beat this crazy socialist from Vermont?
Well, it's also, I think that's the idea, or anybody. Never mind the crazy socialists. He can't get ahead of Warren. He can't get ahead of Buttigieg. I think that's the whole point. That's why fourth, as opposed to second, is so key. But what also I think is hurting him is, one, I think it looked weak for him to say that he wasn't going to testify, because people remember that Hillary Clinton was able to go in front of that Benghazi committee for 11 hours and basically, hand it to Trey Gowdy.
But she was not running at that point yet.
Well, she wasn't running, but it was an expectation that you would have,
of course, of
someone that, like, if they are completely being maligned, that they can go up and defend themselves.
For 12 hours, for however many hours, the man can't get off script.
Well, Biden could do it. He could come in and say, like, I'll testify, but we're limiting it to 2 hours.
But there's going to be a million issues that pop up. Aside from the fact that his son he gets defensive around this subject. He snapped at reporters. He snapped at voters. He's losing it.
Why?
I was just going to say, like, why would he not go in? But
that should be a sound on your.
How do we not have that? Why is that not coming up now? Maybe you get off your phone and that should be fun. Should have why in the background right now.
He's managing your Twitter. Come on, he's doing a million things at once.
I'm beatboxing. I'm a human sample.
All right, this is the other thing that I think.
Yeah, come on, man.
This is the other thing that I think is causing him a problem. Is Joe Biden arguing? Which one should we start with? 2 or 3?
Oh God.
Well, let's start with 3. Here's 3. This is Joe Biden saying, I never proposed a freeze on Social Security.
Do you think, though, that it's fair for voters to question your commitment to Social Security when in the past you proposed a freeze to it?
No, I didn't propose a freeze. Look, we're talking about at the time. You mean when we went together and decided?
Yeah, you talked about it in the context of balancing the budget. No, so is that something that voters should be?
It was in the context of we saved Social Security during the Reagan administration was about to go under, and everyone from Teddy Kennedy on voted for that, to save Social Security.
Okay.
There we go.
Here, let's play the clip, and you can see what the date of this is. What is that? 95, wow. Which incidentally, I am bad at math, but is over a decade, over 10 years after the time that he's claimed. It was true during the Reagan administration. The Senate, everybody went along with it. They raised taxes on the Social Security taxes in anticipation of the baby boom. getting into retirement. And they raised the taxes. They have not raised the cap sufficiently since then, but that did increase the amount of money available in the trust fund and deal with this sort of glut of people that we had that were born after the war. Here's Joe Biden. This is over 10 years later. He's bragging about this. He's not talking about the same thing.
When I argued that we should freeze federal spending, I meant Social Security as well. I meant Medicare and Medicaid. I meant veterans benefits. I meant every single solitary thing in the government. And I not only tried it once, I tried it twice, I tried it a third time, and I tried it a fourth time.
Wow. That's maybe he doesn't remember. I don't know.
Bernie needs to take that ad.
Oh, well, but look, and so here is Biden now again.
Oh, that is so crazy. He's like
sort of backtracking because apparently he didn't realize that C-SPAN is available.
Well,
and that becomes a problem.
Issues, so.
Actually in real contention to get the whole nomination.
This fight with Bernie Sanders over Social Security, you've said that he, quote, doctored video of you from the Senate back in the day talking about Social Security, but you did argue that cost of living adjustments as part of a general spending freeze were necessary to cut federal spending and reduce the deficit. That aside,
that was 20 years ago.
Even if Sanders is playing a little rough here and your position has changed, what about those Democratic voters who say...
It hasn't changed.
What about those Democratic voters who say that Bernie's been consistent this whole time?
Well, he hasn't been, but I'm not going to attack Bernie. He hasn't even been consistent on Social Security. But here's the deal. I laid out clearly what my plan for Social Security is. I'm going to increase Social Security benefits. I'm going to raise taxes for people making over $400,000 so they pay the same tax on every dollar you pay at your salary, or at $100,000 or $50,000 or $40,000. That will, in fact, allow us to get those folks who are outliving their Social Security in terms of benefits, be able them to increase their benefits. Those families where a spouse dies and the total Social Security goes down, increase their benefits.
All right. The plan that he's proposing with the donut hole, I might drop it a little bit lower, but I mean that above 400,000. I mean the bottom line is the reason why we're taking in less income for Social Security is because of huge wealth disparity. And good plan, but he's lying about his record. Yeah. And it is true that Sanders has not been totally consistent. At some times he said he wants to increase Social Security, and at other times he says, I want to increase Social Security more than that. But that's it. At one point he said the word adjustment, and it was clear what he was saying was increase.
It's unreal.
That's what they're hanging all it on is he said adjustment.
He said adjustment, but bookended in like that same year, he called for increases. Yeah. So he's saying we should adjust Social Security.
It's not working. It's just not working.
It's not resonating. Here's Sanders responding to This Is This Weekend. And, I'm struck by this because, we'll do this and I'll talk in a second.
Let me ask you about Vice President Joe Biden. He is looking for an apology for a video circulated by your campaign that he says takes his position on Social Security out of context. Will you apologize?
No, of course I won't. Not on that one, I won't. For many, many years as a United States Senator, Joe Biden has been on the floor and elsewhere talking about the need to freeze or cut Social Security benefits. He voted for the balanced budget amendment.
So you believe it is wrong that Vice President Biden supported a freeze of cost of living adjustments in Social Security?
Absolutely. Bad vote. I voted against it. There are ways to raise money in order to protect the working families of this country. Cutting Social Security ain't one of them.
I mean, that's good for him.
Yep.
And what strikes me is how salient Social Security remains. Mm-hmm. Barack Obama, I'm convinced, and I haven't found, I got to maybe dig around for this a little bit, but Barack Obama, the way that he, in addition, obviously all the stuff in the ground game, but in terms of rhetoric, going into the Iowa caucus, he started talking about Social Security. And there was no they didn't have there was no difference between the candidates in terms of like their Social Security votes. They had never taken votes for Social Security. They probably were all on the same page of like, we need to sort of cut Social Security, or to the extent that anybody had indicated anything. But what he did is he said Social Security was in a crisis. Now, I did not like this, obviously, because Social Security was not in a crisis. And I don't like that type of rhetoric. I'm just talking about in the context of what he did. Mm-hmm. He said it was in crisis, and just by saying that it was in crisis, without sort of even talking about a solution necessarily, I think it gained him a lot of votes just because he acknowledged he created a problem.
That's right.
That people didn't necessarily know existed, or, didn't exist, but that they assumed, okay, he's on it, and I care so much about my Social Security. I want the person who's so focused on Social Security, they're aware that there's a problem, they're going to help me deal with it. I mean, I found that fascinating, and it, I think that's what's happening here, except for there is a much greater sort of distinction between the two candidates in terms of the way they have approached Social Security in the past.
Well, it's so crazy to me that we are having essentially what used to be I don't mean like 40 years ago. I mean, even lockbox. Remember the lockbox with Gore and Bush? I mean, these were conversations Democrats had against Republicans.
Yep.
Biden probably, even though he voted in the 90s, he probably even had these conversations against Republicans until it didn't suit him, or the DLC came in and said, switch your tactics. We got to balance the budget, whatever.
I mean, even when Gore was talking about lockbox, they were still talking about balance in the budget.
Of course.
I mean,
yeah.
the lockbox was more just sort of like, let's not allow cuts to Social Security because they've already, the lockbox actually referred back to what Bush subsequently later, I don't know if you remember this, but he went to the Treasury Department, did a press op in the Treasury Department, surrounded by file cabinets. He said,
oh my God,
this is where your Social Security's gone. It's just IOUs. Open up one of these drawers. See, it just says IOU. That's nothing.
Wow, I don't remember this.
Yes, and this is the way that that Bush was trying to privatize Social Security. And then everybody sort of understood, like, oh, that's what he meant by lockbox, as in the money that's owed, that you cannot allow the general budget to raid from the Social Security Trust Fund to borrow money, because later the Republicans are going to try and default on those loans.
That is brilliant. That's like some messaging,
that Bush did?
Era. Yeah, Bush era, of course, was the messaging was key, but standing in front of a bunch of response?
It did not work. No, it did not work. They tried to privatize Social Security. That's the thing. That Social Security has such a salience, and that is why.
But it wasn't during the election. It was once he was in office.
Once he was in office.
Okay, so I thought it was an electoral.
Oh, no.
I don't remember this.
No, this was in 2004, 2005 or something like that. But I guess the thing that I don't know that the voters know yet, and maybe this is like the second act of this sort of play, is to say that Joe Biden's perspective on Social Security is going to be a liability against Donald Trump.
Yeah.
Because Donald Trump could play the same video.
That's right.
And Donald Trump could say, like, I've never tried to cut Social Security. That's right.
And the interesting thing about Social Security is older voters who were around and may actually remember this are going to be reminded of this. It's not like you're speaking to a new...
I don't think there was anybody at the time that they were listening to that was saying, like, this is a problem.
Yeah.
It was just taken for granted largely that the only way to deal with this problem is to, cut that's why the Obama administration for 3, maybe 4 years, 3.5, basically we're putting on the table cuts to Social Security in this way. Mm-hmm. Cuts in the increase of cost of living, which, or I should say, cuts in the form of lowering the cost of living adjustments, and which is, of course, a cut unless you have massive deflation of pharmaceutical prices, which we have not had and we were never going to have. All right, we got to take a break, head into the fun half. I just want to remind people, the way you support this program, if you enjoy it, and the way you get extra content and the way you listen to it without commercials. Go to jointhemajorityreport.com. So easy, so convenient. You go there, and then like you hear trumpets and all sorts of good things happen. Jointhemajorityreport.com. Also, the AM Quickie, we're getting it out the door earlier. People are responding very well. It's spicier, it's funnier, it's there's more of like a... I'm splitting my time with Lucy Steiner doing each morning. People are loving it. And the more you subscribe to AM Quickie for free, it's completely free, incidentally. It's just like listening to a podcast. Get that 5 minutes. You're walking out the door, 8 a.m. East Coast time. Sets the table for you. It also is very helpful to us here at the Greater Majority Report family. So amquickie.com. Nomiki, would you like to tell people about your show?
Yes, of course. So you can find my new show just launched. I urge you to go to patreon.com/The Nomiki Show. We have our first episode up, full episode with Justin Jackson, congressional candidate Melanie DeRigo, who's running against Tom Suozzi, who is a downstate Democrat, a really bad Democrat. In New York, supporting ICE. He is a member of the Problem Solvers Caucus, which basically just supports Republicans. He caucuses with Republicans, does not release his votes publicly through this caucus, we learned. Yeah, they don't have to, because they vote internally as a caucus. And then it's a cover for them. So they say, well, I just follow what the caucus tells me. And the caucus doesn't have to say, what the numbers were.
Is this a state senator?
No. He's a congressman representing Queens, parts of Queens and Long Island.
He just votes with the Problem Solver
It's like the
Caucus.
IDC.
Yes, okay, I see.
But at the IDC, the Independent Democratic Conference. Yeah. So Melanie DeRigo is running against him. She's extraordinary. You got to check out that interview. And then we do speaking of Joe Biden, we're following the money, his 40 years, his money trail. We're going to continuously do that on our follow the money segment. And you get that early by going to patreon.com/The Nomiki Show and on YouTube and all the podcasty places.
Jamie.
This week on the Antifada, I speak with Daniel Denver, author of All-American Nativism, How the Bipartisan War on Immigrants Explains Politics as We Know It, which is a very good book out now on Verso. He is also the host of Jacobin's The Dig, which is a very good podcast that I listen to when I want to learn things in a way that kind of reminds me of like the NPR of my youth in like a Proustian way, but is actually like socialist. We had a pretty good conversation, if I do say myself. We talk about the history of nativism in America, the material factors driving it, how Democrats and Republicans alike have used nativist politics for their own political gain. We talk about Bernie's immigration platform and how he's evolved on the issue, what a decent left populist trade policy would even be, and what you can do to get involved. So check it out, folks. Patreon.com/The Antifada.
Matt, do you know what's on TMBS tomorrow night?
I do not know.
Oh, well, folks should check it out. He's
gonna be
not
good,
doing it tomorrow night, is he?
Actually, no, that's a good point.
TMBS is going to be on...
Michael's not here, so it will be on Friday.
On Friday?
And I'm not sure who's going to be there.
Tomorrow, Michael and I are going to be at Harvard for a panel. If you're in the area.
Cornel West will be on?
He's going to be on, yeah. Cornel West is on Michael's panel. I can pull that up, actually, if you want. I'm going to be on with Crystal Ball and Phil Agnew, who's a Bernie Sanders surrogate. Sorry to jump in, but it's a Michael plug, so I might as well just tell everybody. But if you're there, it's an amazing panel. I'm trying to find it right now so I can read all the people on it. Oh, here it is. It's called Class Warfare, The Future of Left Politics. I'm on the Revolution Will Not Be Televised with Crystal Ball, Megan Day, Katie Halper, and myself. He is on The Battle for the Soul of the Democratic Party with Esha Krishnawaswamy. I can't say her last name, but I know her. Michael Brooks, Phil Agnew, and Cornel West. Come on.
There you go.
Oh, King.
Come on.
So check out TMBS, patreon.com/TMBS. And I think the second half of the Lula interview is coming up soon.
I think probably Wednesday.
On the youtube.com/The Michael Brooks Show channel. Matt.
Literary Hangover, we're talking about the past of class warfare for the next few episodes. Bacon's Rebellion specifically. I'll be recording another Ebenezer Cook poem on Bacon's Rebellion. It's in couplets from 1730-ish around there. And we're going to be talking about the different sort of race and class elements of Bacon's Rebellion, and also the sort of royalist versus liberty element of it. So check that out. Look forward to that, folks.
I can't get past the whole death of the salesman thing. But, all right, folks. 646-257-3920. See you in the fun half. Left is best. Jamie and I may have a disagreement.
Yeah, you can't just say whatever you want about people just because you're rich.
I have an absolute right to mock them on YouTube.
He's up there buggy whipping like he's the boss.
I am not your employer.
You know, I'm tired of the negativity.
I'm sorry. I didn't mean to upset you. You're nervous. You're a little bit upset. You're riled up.
Yeah, maybe you should rethink your defense of that, you fucking idiots.
We're just going to get rid of you.
All right.
But dude. You want to smoke this joint?
Yes.
Do you feel like you are a dinosaur?
That's some good shit.
Exactly. I'm happy now.
It's a win-win.
It's a win-win-win.
Oh, hell yeah.
Now listen to me. 2, 3, 4, 5 times. 847-906-501-457-238. 56, 27, 1/2, 5 eighths, 3.9 billion.
Wow.
He's the ultimate math nerd.
Don't you see?
Why don't you get a real job instead of spewing vitriol and hatred, you left-wing Limbaugh?
Everybody's taking their dumb juice today.
Come on, Sammy.
Dance, dance, dance. Rand Paul. I had my first post-coital scene with a woman. I'm hoping to add more moves to my repertoire. All I have is the dip and the swirl.
Fine, we can double dip.
Yes, this is a perfect moment.
No.
Wait, what?
You make under $1 million a year. You're scum. You're nothing.
Excuse me? Fuck you, you fucking liberal elite. I think you belong in jail.
Thank you for saying that, Sam. You're a horrible, despicable person.
All right, gonna take a quick break. I want to take a moment to talk to some of the libertarians out there. Take whatever vehicle you want to drive to the library. What you're talking about is jibber jabber.
Classic. I'm feeling more chill already.
Good. Donald Trump can kiss all of our asses.
Hey Sam, hey Andy, you guys ready to do some evil?
Hitler was such an idiot.
That guy might be a Nazi.
Agreed.
No.
Death to America.
You.
Yes.
Wow.
Wow, that's weird. No way! Unbelievable. This guy's got a really good hook. Throw our hands up. Ooh. Wow.
But Sam, I gotta get off.
No worries. Let's. I want to just flesh this out a little bit. I mean, look, it's a free speech issue. If you don't like me,
Hey, shut up.
Thank you for calling into the Majority Report. Sam will be with you shortly.
All right. Yeah, we got to play just a couple. The Bolton thing has just gotten people insane. And then I want to talk about Sanders and particularly this DNC thing. We're going to take some phone calls, ladies and gentlemen. I know we're going to probably have a news day tomorrow. We're going to, I just as a programming note, we're going to be doing more news days going forward for the next, I don't know. I mean, this year is going to be more. It's overwhelming. I mean, it's nuts.
Let's listen. Just tell your parents not to vote for Trump just because we're sick of the news cycle. Like, we need a break. I think that might work.
Or tell
for a
your
couple.
kids. Yes, I guess. Yeah.
Are you sick of texts coming up on your phone, alerts? Don't vote for Trump.
This is, I don't know what this is. Here's Brian Kilmeade, who I feel like what's going on here. Now, Nomi, you may have a better sense of this. Maybe, I don't know. I mean, do people hang around the commissary at Fox News and talk about who they like? But Bolton was on, he did a lot of like Fox and Friends stuff. He was all over the place. And here is Kilmeade. And I can't help but think that Kilmeade is like caught between the authoritarian fealty he feels towards the president and maybe like just some sense of like, John Bolton's a buddy of mine. We would go and,
They'd go across the street and have steaks at the steakhouse where they all go on Friday nights. You know what I'm talking about.
I was going to guess. They just go out and have steaks and smoke cigars.
If you're ever in New York and you want to have some fun, go to the steakhouse. I forgot the name of it. It's really famous. Across the street from Fox News on 48th and
Is it like Smith and Walensky or something?
No,
it's not that one.
It's a chain. They have another one by MSNBC. It's a little smaller,
I don't know.
more affordable one. But go there Friday nights or Thursday nights, and all of the Fox stars are there having drinks, including the Democrats. Like, I've been there, after a show or something. It is hilarious. I don't eat steaks. So
well, here is Brian Kilmeade. I don't think I could walk into that situation and walk out.
Oh my God, we should go undercover. That's a great perk.
Here is Brian Kilmeade.
New York Times brought up the fact that they said that John Bolton has been distributing copies to any or all, to everyone. They said we did not. They said the Times reporting there says they shared the manuscript with others is false. They say they did it through the process, and the process obviously is corrupt.
Pause it for 1 second. Now, here's the thing. It's very difficult to figure out what happened here, but the Times says that the manuscript was delivered to the White House so they could check it for security clearances. The Bolton's lawyer came out and said that we sent the manuscript there. The White House the Times talks about people seeing the drafts. We don't know if the leak came from the White House. However, Bolton's lawyer and clearly has a sense that they shared the manuscript with people who weren't supposed to see it. Like Donald Trump's lawyers, for instance, right? Like, that has nothing to do with that. That has to do with the impeachment stuff. And so he's basically, Bolton's lawyer is basically saying, like, if you come after Bolton like you did Comey and start an investigation, you're going to have to investigate who the White House gave it to and show all that, because we know that you did. Even if the leak didn't necessarily come from there, it's unclear. But here's Brian Kilmeade, and they're trying to talk about how Trump is somehow victimized by this because, of course, he's always the victim.
Is false. They say they did it through the process, and the process obviously is corrupt. So if John Bolton's lawyers are telling the truth here, and they just submitted it in, and it's leaked out, if that is indeed the case, more evidence that people within the administration are actually against the administration. And the other thing is devastating timing, because this thing was on the fast track to closing out without witnesses on Friday. Only Mitt Romney pretty much saying, I want to see witnesses. Everybody else saying, I've heard enough. And now this gives fuel to the Senator Schumers of the world, the Adam Schiffs of the world, to say, I need a witness, and he wants to testify.
But when you say devastating timing, it's got to be a coincidence, right? That it would come out just hours before the Senate impeachment is going to start at 1 o'clock.
Okay, so there's Ducey trying to do some type of sarcasm, I guess. But the amazing thing is they're going to try and make Donald Trump be the victim, that he can't seem to hire anybody in his administration who's not working against the administration.
I thought I could at least hire Fox News contributors.
That's the problem. So when they turn on him, they just go back on TV.
Right.
And
There's
do what they
absolutely no honor amongst thieves. That's the problem. They're just like, they've got Lev Parnas and Igor Fruman. I mean, I don't know how you get to record a president in a frank conversation so easily.
Your phones should be taken. Any other situation with a senator, if you meet with a senator, for the most part, I assume, the staff is going to say, please, don't, for a highly sensitive meeting. But the president, for sure.
One would think that they were on top of this.
He also tweets from his phone, which I think he's the first president he actually has Obama had a BlackBerry until BlackBerries went extinct, and then he bought them all out and kept them.
Very strange. Very, very strange. But there it is. Fox News trying to figure out how they're going to spin this. And the only way they can do it so far is that Donald Trump has been victimized by his own inability to hire anybody who doesn't stab him in the back.
Is the former head of Fox News still working on Trump's campaign? Does anybody know?
I know who you're talking about.
Bill,
I think he's still in the White House. He's Sean Hannity's best bud.
Yeah.
Oh, I think he's on the campaign now.
Right.
Actually, not in the White House. But here it is. Here is Ducey.
Because if the president said, I'll give you the money, but you got to investigate Joe Biden, that is really off the rails wrong. Apparently, it says Bolton was told Trump wanted to continue freezing money to Ukraine until they helped with probes of the Bidens. But we heard him say in the transcript he wanted President Zelensky to look into the Bidens and what happened in 2016. So is this a big story?
You think?
That's like
the goalpost. Is this a big story?
Wait, is this really 4 bigs? This is one more example of how flummoxed they are about this Bolton testimony, because it's literally as if like Donald Trump Jr. just like stood up one day and said, I need to have a press conference. I got a couple of things to get off my chest. And then basically just, I mean, that they don't know how to react to this. And here is Mike Braun, Senator Mike Braun, who is, one of these like sort of like a Ron Johnson type of like guy who, no nonsense. I'm just a businessman. I'm not a politician. I don't use mealy mouth words. And he has been sent out the past couple of days to talk about this. And it looks now like he got the short straw. He's on the Casey Hunt show.
Do you care that John Bolton is saying that the president had a quid pro quo for money that Congress authorized for this purpose?
I mean, I think that he's out there saying that's going to be part of his book. When it comes to
now, pause it for 1 second. I'm sorry. We're going to start again. I will challenge anybody to tell me what he is saying. Like, I know the words, but like the combination of words he uses here, I want to know exactly what is the gist of what he's saying here, even broad strokes.
Do you care that John Bolton is saying that the president had a quid pro quo for money that Congress authorized for this purpose?
I mean, I think that he's out there saying that's going to be part of his book. When it comes to his saying that, then you'd have to go through all the things you do with any witness. The integrity of the witness. Is there anything that would motivate him to do it?
Do you question John Bolton's integrity?
No, but you'd go through that, especially.
I mean, this is a guy who's been a conservative hawk, part of the national security establishment for years.
But I think once that would come into the mix, you'd have to take everything else that would come along with it. You'd have to let the defense team pile through all of that, and you'd have to see what you come up with. And my gut tells me, and we're all kind of dealing with what we think is going to happen, that the case so far did not deliver the goods, the information to where anybody has changed their mind. So it'll be interesting to see what happens, since this came hot off the press just a little bit ago.
But again, I mean, just to go back to, I understand how we got here, but now John Bolton is saying, I'll come testify before the Senate if you subpoena me. And he potentially
we knew that
has.
Before.
Sure, yes. But now he's saying, we were to a certain extent expecting the lead of this New York Times story to be what John Bolton has to say. How can you stand up and say, sorry, I don't want to hear it?
Well, the difference would be now a snippet of what is probably going to be in the book has been released, and we'll all have to size that up and see what we think, how it impacts our own decision and what we do with more information.
My God.
So this is how a trial works. I'm going to walk you through step by step and not share any perspective.
That's I just think that the ability for him to sit there and not go like, is that going to work? Oh, shit. Are we live? Like, the question was, do you care that this information has come out? And he's like, well, he's saying it. He's saying it in a book, but you got to look at his integrity. Do you have an issue with his integrity? No, absolutely not. I don't. But I'm saying, like, you got to look at it. And then there's stuff that comes with that. And my gut tells me that this case so far has not, done anything. And we'll see what happens.
That's the hint, though, the integrity. That's what stuck out, that he is alluding to. They're going to challenge his integrity, which, John Bolton's integrity. Not tough to challenge.
I guess what they're going to have to do is argue like he is lying. Yep. But for them to get to the point where he's lying, You have to tell everybody what he's lying about, right? And then it becomes like, then we got to decide. Like, I don't know. I mean, it's like, are you hungry? Well, lunch exists, and in the past, lunch has existed as well. It could be in the future. We're just not going to know. No, but are you hungry? Food. There's food. Food exists, and the way that people grow it is they grow it or they harvest it. So we'll see. That to me is amazing. All right, let's talk a little bit about what's going on in terms of like the polling. Let's just start with Mike Bloomberg as a way of introducing this segment where we talk about. Oh, and we should also say, well, here's two different perspectives on Bernie Sanders. This one is from Mike Bloomberg, who is. This is fascinating. Oh my God. He's at a Jewish rally in Florida, and he is. I'm trying to figure out like how this translates, but here it is. There's a Jewish star over Mike's name. I mean, he's in Florida. He's going to play it up. Amazing. Go.
Now, I know I'm not the only Jewish candidate running for president, but I am the only one who doesn't want to turn America into a kibbutz.
Sounds pretty awesome to me.
What's interesting about this is that for folks who don't know what a kibbutz is, it was one of the sort of foundational elements of the founding of the state of Israel. They are socialist communities. They, there's still some that I think sort of retain that quality in Israel.
Spent some time on one back in the day.
Yes, Bernie did.
Bernie did. I picked some peaches, I think it was, or pears for a couple of weeks on a kibbutz when I was a kid.
You did?
Yeah, I mean, you go over in the summer, some youth group trip 40 years ago. In fact, I watched the helicopters go across the Mediterranean to attack Lebanon. That was sort of the beginning of some of my issues with Israel, actually. And I got into a big fight with my rabbi. That's a different story.
That'll happen.
But it's interesting to see what he's trying to trigger there. On one hand, he's trying to say, like, I'm not trying to turn the country into a big socialist state. Mm-hmm. But it's also sort of interesting, like, it's also reminding these folks that, like, yeah, Bernie has, like a pre-existing relationship with Israel. Mm-hmm. And it's going to be hard to sort of undercut Sanders to the community on that basis. Mm-hmm. But I don't know. It's an interesting sort of, I think he's basically just going like, I'm not going to raise your taxes.
I think what was happening here was this was just as much a signal to Republicans and AIPAC supporting Democrats that are not Jewish, and of course Republicans, again, that I'm your guy. Like right. Sanders, okay, great.
I'm not Jewish. That kind of
I'm
Jew.
not that kind.
Yeah,
I don't. Yeah.
It goes back to that article. I don't know if it was a Tablet or some other conservative Jewish magazine that said like Bernie Sanders reminds me of like my socialist relative, and every Jew knows what I'm talking about, and they're like annoying and crazy, but they're part of the family, but like they shouldn't be president.
Yeah, I think that's exactly that exactly feels like the tone.
Like, oh, Zadie.
Right. He's crazy Uncle Bernie.
Bernie Sanders should just respond and be like, you know who you remind me of? Benjamin Netanyahu.
Yeah, indeed. I think he might take that as a
compliment. Yeah.
As a compliment. All right. But let's take one more perspective on Bernie Sanders, and this is from Donald Trump. And he was being recorded by Igor Fruman. I don't know why they call it the Les Parnas audio, but it was clearly Igor Fruman who was recording it. But it was Parnas's lawyer, I guess, that released it. Or ABC got it, I think. I don't know. This is I don't think they should call it the Lev Parnas video. Although Parnas is there, and you hear Lev Parnas on the audio tape. But Fruman, you can see at the beginning of he's using his video. Mm-hmm. camera on his phone, and he shoots his own seat. He's very excited that he's got a label there. But here it is. This is where they turn to the election because Trump is still talking about it. And he says that the only person that he was afraid of, he was afraid that Hillary would pick Bernie Sanders as her running mate. And then he backs off like, but of course I would have won anyways. And then I don't know if this goes all the way to the point where they say Biden might run and they start laughing. All right, Bo, here.
Hey, Bernie Sanders thought about it. They rigged it. Bernie would have beat Hillary in them right now.
That would have been tougher.
Yeah, I agree.
Because there was no hatred.
Right, you're right. There was no hatred. Millennials were right.
As great as he was, half my motivation in working was not let her do it.
100%. Right. Yeah. That's why I think a big part of our vice president would have been tougher. Kane was what I couldn't.
But I think Bernie, because all those people that hated her so much who voted for me. I got 20% of Bernie vote. People don't realize that because of trade. Because he's a big trade guy. He basically says we're getting screwed on trade. And he's right. I'm worse than he is. And we can do something about it. I don't know if he could have. But had she picked Bernie Sanders, it would have been tougher. It was the only one I didn't want her to pick.
All right. So to be clear, they're going back and forth, and he's saying that he's the only one I didn't want her to pick. I got 20% of the votes, which of course is not true. We know it's 12% of the votes that he got, the people who voted for Bernie Sanders in the primary. And there's been new data that's come out that shows that they were mostly conservative and older voters who would have unlikely to have voted for Clinton and under any circumstance. But
I'm very sorry. Do we know what states? I mean, were these like New Hampshire voters who decided it's an open primary? I can vote for Bernie Sanders. I'm going to.
I haven't seen that. But 12%
it was
is
fewer than the number of voters who defected from
Clinton to
Obama
McCain.
to McCain.
Yeah, to Clinton to McCain.
The Clinton primary people.
Yes. So it's not. But Donald Trump was convinced that he would have. It's quite possible that that would have made the difference in those states. I mean, that's the theory that people have now. He then goes on to say, but of course, it's also possible that the moderate Democrats would have voted for me instead of, having Bernie Sanders, which not inconceivable, certainly at the time.
Against Hillary. I mean, Hillary was there. I know.
Oh, I think he was. I think I don't know if they were. He was saying about. I think he was saying if he had been the nominee, but then you can also.
No, yeah.
And then they go on to say like Joe Biden runs, and Lev Parnas is like, oh, I would like that.
Yeah.
Because he was laughing, obviously, So interesting that was Donald Trump's perspective on this stuff, at least in 2017, I guess that was.
I think he's right about trade. Like we've been harping on it. Michael likes to harp on it a lot on this show, too. The role that trade, globalization and deindustrialization played in Trump's victory, particularly in the Rust Belt.
Totally.
And, it is a delicate dance for people on the left to have some sort of trade policy that goes against globalization because it often it's protectionist. It's protectionism. But at least Bernie's trade policy has the outlines of something that preserves the free movement of people, immigrants' rights, in addition to placing restrictions on capital.
We during the DNC platform committee, it was one of our craziest fights was over TPP. And you can go back into the archives and find this footage. I mean, this was the defining issue. That and actually fracking were the two issues that we had discussed internally with the Clinton campaign because they said, okay, yes, we are against TPP. And they immediately reversed that decision. Same thing with fracking the day after the platform committee. And we were furious and they wanted all of our support from the Bernie side. And there's a famous article in the Daily Beast called "They Didn't Fucking Listen to Us." It was a quote I gave the reporter. It's insane how they disrespected the Bernie base.
I'll tell you something. Barack Obama does not get enough credit for helping lose that election because of pushing TPP so hard.
I was afraid of where you were going for that.
No, well, I mean, look, right. I have no doubt that in a sort of like that the desire for the Clinton people to pursue TPP was organic. But certainly they would have let go of it, I think, much easier, and they wouldn't have had it around their necks had Barack Obama not made it such a hugely desperate insistence that this thing passed and whipped people. And I'm quite convinced that there was a lot of pressure on her campaign. I mean, who knows, absent that pressure, would they have jettisoned much earlier? But that definitely hurt. I mean, when you're talking about 5,000 or 6,000 vote swing, that definitely hurt her.
And what's interesting about that, looping into the DNC conversation we'll have later, Tom Perez was the labor secretary who grew up in Buffalo, New York, where I grew up, touts his labor credentials. But the reality is he pushed for TPP, and it was one of the reasons why Barack Obama chose him for DNC chair. And, at the end of the day, when we get to the rig part, moved the votes for Tom Perez to be chair.
All right, let's get to this. First off, let's start with the people who have been appointed to the Rules Committee
list.
And to the issue. There's 3 separate committees that were
Credentials, platform, and rules.
Right. And so tell us what those
the standing committees.
What's the relevance of those committees? What do they do?
Okay, so this is confusing even for reporters. We get these questions a lot. The DNC has membership, right? The majority, 3/4 of the DNC's membership,
and it's like only like 700 people, right?
400 and something members.
Okay.
I don't know what the last count is. They are the majority, 3/4 are elected, and then about 1/4 are appointed by the DNC chair. The DNC chair at the end of the day. Now let's just remind everybody that in America, this libertarian-esque country that we live in, the parties are corporations. So at the end of the day, the committees, the executive committees, and the chair really determine, they have the absolute decision based on their rules. The chair can decide everything. They can change rules last minute, as they did in the DNC chair election. They can appoint people. They can interpret the rules how they want. And because of the way that the DNC is structured, there is little to no oversight or accountability. Absolutely no accountability, I should say.
That's really interesting, because I remember back when everyone was mad about Tom Perez getting to be DNC chair over Keith Ellison. Yeah. A lot of people said, what's the big deal? The DNC chair isn't that important a job.
That's bullshit. That's absolute, total bullshit. So the DNC chair appointed, aside from this list, they usually have 2 meetings a year, around February, late January, and then in the fall, which is the winter meeting, which is usually around August, September. Except not in election years. In election years, we're just going into the convention, and then that's what this meeting is. So normally in the DNC, there's a rules committee in which all of the members of the rules committee are not elected DNC members, but appointed by Tom Perez.
Right.
So the 2 effing years I spent with 22 people on the Unity Reform Commission, going around the country, investigating the rules of the party, blah, 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 coming up with our recommendations, voting, arguing about the budgets and eliminating superdelegates. That entire package that we agreed to at the end of the day was taken to the DNC greater membership. The greater membership voted on the package. And then afterwards, it was sent to this appointed rules committee in which they essentially wrecked it. Because there is no democracy there. That is the DNC. So, okay, yeah, it's like if Congress and the Senate voted on, the budget, and then suddenly Donald Trump was like, yeah, I think I'm going to hand it to Mick Mulvaney and and a couple of my friends to decide how we want to interpret this.
Okay, so what are the implications, though?
So the implications. So this situation here, this is the committee around the convention. So the platform committee, the co-chairs of the entire, let me go through this real quick. The co-chairs, it's not on here, of the convention, one is Maria Cardona. Maria Cardona is not an elected DNC member. She's a longtime DNC member. She's a lobbyist. I'll put some greatest hits of Nomi and Maria going at it on CNN. She's a despicable human being. And, the majority of these people who've been appointed, with exception to a few because he wants to balance it out and look like he's fair, are lobbyists, consultants. They represent interests that, whether it's foreign interests or oil and gas companies, weapons manufacturers. I mean, literally the people who are determining how the rules of the party are interpreted and the rules of the party that go into how we decide the convention, which I'll get to in a second, are these types of people.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
So the bad people. What is and certainly, there's been a lot of people who, pointed out that like Barney Frank, he's extremely anti-Bernie. I mean, there's obviously all these people have
motives.
It's not Charlie Baker as in.
No. This is Charlie Baker, consultant. He was on the Unity Reform Commission as well.
Okay. And so you have a lot of people on this list who are, there's a couple of union people, but Heidi Heitkamp, of course, why wouldn't you have Harold Ickes?
Shout out North Dakota.
I mean, they're on the rules committee. The co-chairs are
Carol Browner. Let's go to her. Carol Browner, former head of the EPA, who is known for being like a fracking queen.
Right. I mean, there's a whole.
Normal Democrats don't like fracking anymore.
So
Republicans.
What? I mean, I'm looking at this list. There's a lot of people on there who I just off the top of my head I know are John Podesta. Yeah. Bakari Sellers. I mean, these
not
are
in office, by the way.
These are not people who are friendly with Bernie Sanders per se. But okay, here's my question. Scroll back up. Credentials committee. What does that? What they decide who gets credentialed and goes into, but it's not just like, oh, you're going to get a media pass. It's you are a specific voting member of a state delegation.
Exactly.
Which means that if there is some internal battle within a state.
That's right.
Where we're 5 of our delegates, and our electors or whatever that they have in the state are for Biden and 5 are for Bernie.
Or say 2 were for Pete Buttigieg. And what do we do with these Pete Buttigieg people? Because he's out of the race now.
These are just individuals who can decide that even though their state voted a certain way, I can vote a different way in the context of the convention.
That it didn't really happen that way with the election in 2016. I think it could become more complicated if you have people like if Martin O'Malley had delegates, like what would he have done with all of his delegates and where would they go to? But
they're basically saying like, we don't recognize these delegates. We recognize those delegates. Does that happen?
They approve of the delegates. I mean, that's less controversial. I mean, it could be different. I mean, maybe I'm wrong about that. I wasn't on the credentials committee last time. I was on the platform committee. But the other aspect of this, and this is what happened last time around, I haven't been yelled at by the Sanders campaign for saying this in the past. They wanted to have staff. Okay, so going into the convention, right? Remember that Bernie Sanders had 44% of the vote. We did not have a decided convention going in. Hillary did not hit there's a number that she had to hit where it says, okay, you have won the nomination.
She hadn't clinched it.
And people think, oh, she had it. She didn't. She didn't hit the threshold that you need legally to take the nomination.
But the only way that well, I guess that's true. But in terms of actually elected delegates, right? Put aside the super delegates for a moment.
Exactly.
She had more than Bernie going into the convention.
Not as many as, I don't remember the actual numbers. I'm sorry if I wasn't prepared for this, but before California, it was like 150, I think, difference. So it was actually very close. Of course, the AP called it right before California, and then she won the majority of the delegates in California. But still, it was within a range of real dispute, and it could have technically been a brokered convention.
Well, I mean, yeah, it could be a brokered convention, but I can just say that. Let me just say this: if Bernie Sanders had the majority, like I understand that you need to hit a threshold before you clinch it, right? Because you have the super delegates. But put aside the super delegates. If Bernie Sanders had 50 delegates and she had 43 delegates, and they go into the convention, and the super delegates make up the difference for Hillary Clinton, I mean, like, I think you're going to have, and vice versa. That's my point, is that like it should have gone to the person who has the most delegates going into the convention,
Except, and I understand that, I think
elected, voted on delegates.
Right.
But like, who's going to stop the superdelegates from doing that if it's according to the rules?
Well, I think the superdelegates can do that, but I'm just saying, what I'm saying is
just the elected delegates.
I am saying, for me, for Sam Seder, from my perspective,
yeah,
like the superdelegates should not overturn,
of course,
the vote, even if it hasn't been clinched, because it can only be clinched with the superdelegates at that point. Well, that
was the intent of superdelegates. The problem, and we had a really tough time arguing this on the Unity Reform Commission because they claimed, it was a violation of free speech. And Marcia Fudge, Representative Fudge, was very vocal about this as a congresswoman. And she was fair with other things, just to be fair to her. But they had said, we said you can't declare who you're supporting ahead of time because that influenced how the election, the media coverage, the polling, everything. I mean, and it influenced California. I mean, they called California before California even voted. So that's where the superdelegates affected the actual delegate number. Now, if we hadn't had 400 superdelegates line up, or however many, ahead of time for Hillary in August, I mean, that's why Joe Biden didn't run in 2016, was because he just didn't have that lock on superdelegates. And so, but
superdelegates change their mind. We saw a couple of that happen. I mean, it happens. It happens.
Sure.
Certainly happened. It happened big time with Obama and Clinton.
Yes.
And I mean, big time.
But different DNC.
Well, different DNC. But I mean, look,
more Democratic DNC.
Superdelegates can change their mind. All they're doing is they're being, you have media outlets that call and say, who are you going to vote for? Right. They say it. So they're not even necessarily like holding a press conference and declaring it.
Some, but majority are surrogates.
Right.
I mean, look at this list.
No. I agree. But but we have to presume that the actual voters take that into consideration. And I think it's possible, but it's very hard for us who are just swimming in this sort of cable news sort of like universe to understand how detached even primary voters are from that type of analysis.
I think,
I remember all the time, and and certainly on some shows they would be sort of like, want to make this clear, this is the actual delegate account, and then this is the super delegates, and we're presuming that they do this, et cetera, et cetera.
I was on air. This footage, maybe what I'm going to do is I'm going to do like a montage and release some of this footage from 2016 because it's even a refresher for me. But in 2016, I was on CBS and there was a consultant who had a very large contract with the DNC, who now works for CBS as well. And she literally said to me, your analysis on superdelegates is wrong. They can do whatever they want. And I pulled out the rules of the Democratic Party and I said verbatim what the rules were regarding superdelegates. People were unaware of how this worked. And the journalist even sided with her. And later, he came back and apologized to me. People just did not understand. He was a nice guy. They just didn't understand the process, including the people who were sent out there to defend it. Maria Cardona, we were on CNN, and I called her out as a superdelegate. I said, you're sitting here arguing about superdelegates. Could you at least say that you are a superdelegate? I mean, just tell me.
To be fair, it is very confusing. I'm confused by it. I would hope that she understands it a little bit better.
Well, it's probably done by design.
But
she knows.
Can superdelegates do whatever they want? I just thought that they could.
It depends on when. It's so now let's 2016, there was freedom of choice. Yeah, okay. These people are appointed to the Democratic Party. So they're there for a reason. They're not like, for instance, on this entire list, I just want to make it very clear, the only person on this list that supported Bernie Sanders or any progressive in that race last time was Larry Cohen.
Larry Cohen.
Shout out to Larry Cohen.
Now I'll tell you why this is more upsetting to me than 2016. Because in 2016, there was nobody who thought that Bernie Sanders, over the course of the summer, thought that Bernie Sanders was going to be an actual threat. Maybe a little pesky and this and that, and it'll be spicy and maybe whatever. And so the idea that they were doing stuff to prevent Bernie Sanders from becoming the nominee, I just think was far-fetched insofar as they're just doing what a campaign what a party does when they think that they have a nominee that is already sort of like a shoo-in. We have to remember 35 years ago, there's no primaries. Well, I guess we're at now it's
40 something
like
years
45, 50. But
you know, you were alive.
I was alive, actually. I was alive. And but there were no primaries.
Yeah.
I mean, there was one or two, but there was completely backroom.
Right.
And so
That's how we lost Henry Wallace.
And the super delegates were brought in as a way of like, we can't have another McGovern type of situation.
Can I tell you how many times that came up on the URC?
Right. And
that makes me so angry.
Thank you. Hillary Clinton was McGovern, by the way.
I do think there should be a mechanism where there's some way of like, let's say Clinton had gotten indicted in September.
Of course.
Right? Like there has to be a way for the party to sort of say, like, we have somebody who's indicted. Yeah. And there has to be some mechanism. And the question is like, what's that mechanism? I'm not sure. Maybe that's for another day.
Well,
right?
If superdelegates could swing it in that case, couldn't they hypothetically also swing it in a different case? Like they just don't like the candidate.
Absolutely.
Well, they could absolutely
in a way that nobody has before.
But this is all political, right? I mean, there's no constitution here, right? There's maybe a charter, but the bottom line is like, they also have to recognize that it's not like people aren't going to know.
Well,
if Hillary Clinton is, just to use an example, is indicted in September of 2016 and the DNC says like, we've got to vote to have a different nominee, theoretically the Democratic Party, I'm talking about like everybody who's registered as a Democrat is like, I don't want an indicted person to go run. Okay, I stand behind the superdelegate stepping in and doing something or whatever the mechanism.
Why does it have to be superdelegates? Why couldn't it just be the DNC votes as a body, the elected members of the DNC vote as a body on who to pick? Why does it have to be a bunch of people who are appointed by essentially Barack Obama, because this is Tom Chair's decision and I have no problems calling out Tom Perez on multiple counts. He's like checked out, doesn't understand the rule. He's there as a rubber stamp.
I agree. I think there needs to be
disrespectful to members on top of it. Extremely disrespectful to members.
Okay. All right. Well, let's just do structural stuff.
But that's
here.
important because I'll get to.
But yes, I mean, I think that
there's a rebellion in the DNC. Let me just say that.
If you had another mechanism, I mean, the DNC then, I guess theoretically they're elected. These people are elected from their local parties and whatnot.
Course, yeah.
And that is, I think, a better way of doing it. I think like the way you get rid of the superdelegate system is where they do something like that. And then it's over.
We had proposed and it did not pass. And there were a couple of things that were extremely dangerous in terms of radical transformation of the party. One was we wanted, and this was my big issue, it was a big fight, was banning conflicts of interest in the party. And what that means is nobody who has a contract with the party or any of the candidates can be a voting member of the Democratic National Committee, meaning 3/4 of these people.
You can't hire yourself.
Exactly.
Right, of course.
So the Rules Committee, normally, forget about the convention, is in charge of interpreting the budgets and allocating, the executive committee, forget about the Rules Committee. The executive committee is supposed to be there and they're not even fully elected, which is ridiculous. They're appointed, the executive committee. So they're there to be a rubber stamp for the chair. And they're voting on budgets, supposedly, which is BS, that decide where to put the money when half the executive committee is making money off the DNC.
All right. And I remember we played your clip. We played that clip where you basically laid that out in front of all of them at that time. And I think like that's important, like the self-dealing is unbelievable.
But it would have 3/4 of this list would have been gone if we had gotten rid of that.
All right. But here's my question, because I think like there's no doubt that as an enterprise, there's a lot of self-dealing. There's a lot of money. Like I would never, recommend that anybody donates money to the DNC. No. Do it directly to candidates. do it to other organizations, but to do it to the DNC, there's just not, like, this would get a rating in one of those, like, charity ratings is, very low.
I'll just tell you that Charlie Baker will be getting his 15th home with your donors.
But aside from that, what I'm interested in is, like, how will they prevent?
Yeah.
Like, how, as it's structured here, I know they're all anti-Bernie for the most part, but what can they do to stop Bernie Sanders from winning if he gets more delegates than anybody else going into the convention?
It depends on how the convention, what the number is for, of course, the person who gets the second most delegates. And, if I can just rewind a little bit and talk about what happens locally, right? So in 2016 in Iowa, caucus sites suddenly changed and they were much smaller, and you had lines out the door and people were being denied at 7 p.m. entering caucus sites. And of course, they were Bernie Sanders. The record number of people turned out, but they knew that this was going to happen based on 2008 with Hillary versus Obama, and they chose smaller caucus sites. And there were people, their precinct captains, saying, I don't know why they changed it last minute, but the chair of the local party was a Hillary Clinton superdelegate. So this is, all politics is local. And I know we all hate process and we only start to pay attention when it matters. But, who your chair is of your Democratic Party. And
is that an elected position?
It depends on the state. Sometimes it's appointed. So I think of our chairs on, I don't think our chair for New York is here, but Charlie King is a notable consultant here in New York, and he's very involved in New York politics. He's a Cuomo guy. These are the state. The state interprets their delegates too. So sorry to make it more confusing. Some states are more Democratic than others. Iowa has a pretty good process. But even with that, Hillary Clinton had such relationships that these people would pull a couple favors here and there, and then suddenly it adds up. And then you've got a coin toss. And so, New Hampshire, Nevada was notorious for this. Nevada, all the party bosses were threatening folks for supporting Bernie Sanders.
But this is, is this when we say the DNC as an organization, like, just they're members of the DNC, but is it the DNC leaning on these Nevada party chairs, or is it just like the Nevada party chairs have their own agendas as well?
No, I can't confirm that every single Nevada party chair. Of course, Hillary Clinton's team was calling up, Harry Reid specifically was working Nevada, or, the chairs in the precinct, whatever, the county chairs in Iowa were working with the Clinton campaign. I mean, we know this when it came to Arkansas, I think it was Arkansas, notably Arkansas, Hillary Clinton, the joint fundraising agreement. You guys remember that?
Yeah.
Okay, so the money with the joint fundraising agreement was a way. Do you remember this crazy thing? There was this messaging that the Clinton campaign had where they said, Hillary Clinton is giving money to state parties and Bernie Sanders is not a Democrat and he is not giving the money. Well, of course, it was exposed that through the joint fundraising agreement,
the money was going back to...
Right. So they were sending it locally, and it was going right back through super PACs and loopholes back to the Hillary Clinton campaign. And so, this was like old school politics. I don't think that Biden has that this time around. Maybe in a few states, South Carolina probably, maybe even in Ohio. I'm thinking of certain states where he might have those relationships, and through that also, Perez.
Right. People, like, the thing with the Clintons had is that they had been involved in national Democratic politics for 40 years.
It favors, a lot of favors.
And they had built up a lot of favors, and they had a network of, that is the only reason, why I have an issue with looking at 2016 and saying it was rigged against Bernie Sanders. At one point, it's also like they're just a massive political juggernaut that has built these relationships, which is, let me put it this way, any campaign that does not have relationships with people on the ground, that they have said, look, get your community here to do this, or get your organization to do that. And when and the implicit thing is you're going to have access to my administration. That's how politics work.
But interpreting rules, changing caucus locations, moving money into a party and saying, look, they support our party. Will you support? Those are lies. And those are that the mechanical tool was the DNC to deliver, through Debbie Wasserman Schultz and her associates, very close ally of Hillary Clinton. She even publicly said later that the DNC was weighing towards Hillary Clinton. So I won't even say rigged against Bernie. It was rigged for the Clintons.
Right, without a doubt. I mean, it was Martin O'Malley was the first person who came out in, I think it was July of 2015, and said this schedule is rigged for her, which I think was the most sort of obvious. I think that actually backfired. I don't think it was done very well, and it was sort of like the schedule was developed as a way of like hiding, as if she was an incumbent, in that respect. And certainly, if you had an incumbent, it would be rigged in favor of the incumbent, without a doubt, right? I mean, like all these forces align. I guess rigged to me just sort of seems like there is some lever that is pushed that like makes it impossible, as opposed to there being a machine that is working towards it, caucuses versus primaries. Like there's an argument as to, I think, sort of like depending on how democratic you want to look at it, that one may be more so than another, just because one measures like sort of like popular will and the other one measures like sort of the depth of that will, and I don't know which is necessarily better.
Well, rigged also implies that somebody cheated or broke the rules in order to get the result that they wanted. But it could just be that, the system is rigged and set up in favor of incumbents. And
I think that's
and they broke the
without
rules,
breaking
though.
any rules.
No, they broke the rules all over the place. That's why the DNC chair election was what it was. There are people who supported Ellison that were not Bernie Sanders supporters who knew and did not have the courage or care enough or whatever to stand up at that point and say the rules are being broken.
Okay, so in this instance, right, where they don't have the same power over the state parties now, or at least that there isn't like a
hopefully not
candidate that is, I mean, hopefully not. I guess we'll find out. But they don't have that. The power that they have over these people is not as obvious because the candidate doesn't have the relationships that obviously you need to reinforce this stuff.
Biden might have it in key states.
In some.
Yeah.
But what can they do here?
Right.
Like, and I guess like it's hard to sort of anticipate, right? Like,
well, okay. So
they're not going to do a rule like, well, if your first name starts with a B, then you can't be president, right?
They try to do that, by the way, something like that. If you're not a registered Democrat today or whatever it was, then you cannot run for president. And it didn't pass because it was so offensive. And it was one guy who was absolutely nuts. So the Credentials Committee, the only thing that I'll flag there, and I have to look into this more because I wasn't on Credentials last time and I can't remember enough. Credentials Committee, they, the Bernie campaign in 2016, as we went into this not decided election convention, did not receive passes for his staff, enough passes to be on the floor. So they wanted the campaign to control their delegates. And at the end of the day, they had a handful and they kept taking them back. And every day they'd have fewer passes. So, you want to get on I was on the floor of a convention as a delegate and as somebody who had a media pass. So sort of two versions of access. And there were staff members, senior staff members of the Bernie campaign who could not get on the floor.
That's nuts.
That is nuts. I'm concerned that all of this funny business could happen and be more or less invisible once again.
Well, right.
And you could say the last time around, there was funny business, but it didn't matter because Hillary would have won anyway.
Exactly.
And I'm concerned if it's close enough where Bernie's just a little bit ahead and they do it like that again and it actually does change the outcome, no one's going to know.
That's their calculation.
I'm remembering that part versus in a situation where like, oh, Hillary's getting indicted, it'd be all over the news. They did what they did. People would know about it. But like in this case, I remember a clip from the Michael Moore documentary that I was watching where they're announcing like the delegate counts from the different states. And, the head of the Democratic Party in West Virginia got up and said more than half of the delegates were going to go to Hillary. And then there was that tiny little sign that someone was holding up next to it that said Bernie won all 55 counties in West Virginia. And I feel like people will not know that that's going on if that's what happens, because if Bernie, like, it just seems, it makes sense to people that the establishment candidate would win. You know, if Bernie won, it would kind of be a shift in our reality. Right. So people would just let it go by totally unremarked. That's my concern.
I think there's more opportunity now, today, in this era than there ever has been to sort of be able to call that out.
And this is where, like, when does Pete Buttigieg get out of the race? What happens to his delegates? Same thing with Warren. I mean, this is where the funny business is going to happen. And even if Bernie is winning by wide margins, I mean, that's why we have to keep that psychological messaging that he is essentially the nominee and, like, get on board or you're basically lighting the DNC on fire. On the West Virginia note, this is, if you guys want to learn about the delegate process, there's an activist from West Virginia named Selena Vickers. And she's on Facebook all the time. She goes to every single DNC meeting and live streams it. But she is so tapped into the delegate information and the rules. And she messaged me that, I don't know, I have to look into this more, but there is a path for superdelegates to change the rules of the convention to vote on the first ballot. I don't know enough about this. I'm going to look into it. I'll follow up on the next show and my show. But she's pretty well knowledge on this and does her research. So
yeah, that's something we're going to watch out. All right, let's go to the phones. Calling from a 720 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
This is me?
Yeah, 720?
Yeah. Hi, this is Dale from Colorado.
Dale from Colorado. What's on your mind?
Yeah. Well, right now I'm in Iowa, knocking doors for Bernie.
Sweet. All right. How's it going?
Oh, it's going great. Just a lot of enthusiasm. I have a lot of people that, even just getting dinner right here at Chili's, people like see my hat and walk up and talk to me about Bernie and like.
What do you do when you go knock on the doors? Tell us what do you say?
Like, we're trying to get people to show up at the caucus on Monday of ours. So just ask them, are you caucusing for Bernie? They say yes or no. And then if they say no, ask them who their choice is. Kind of, you know, if they're wavering, if they're undecided, give them the little pitch. Try to, you know, get them to go.
Do you have a specific set of talking points? All right, so one, you're trying to assess if they're caucusing. Two, you're trying to assess if they're caucusing for Bernie. Three, you're trying to assess if they're not caucusing for Bernie, who they're caucusing for, and you want to find out the depth of their attachment to that candidate. What do you try and convince them to caucus for Bernie if they say they're caucusing for somebody else? Are there candidates that, if you're going to be caucusing for this person, all right, fine, we'll move on to the next one? Or do you just have the same reaction to all of them?
Well, for people that are like more viable, I usually just kind of move on. But for the less viable people, I try to get them to, okay, yeah, sure, on the first ballot, vote for that person. I really like you know, Tom Steyer has a good message on climate change or whatever. Yang's UBI idea is really good. I think that in a few cycles we could definitely get something like that done. And then get them to vote on the second ballot.
In other words, you get into the circle of trust, right? That's it. Like, yeah, I accept.
Yeah, like I'm not trying to like shit on, you know.
You mean you didn't read that fake
drag
memo?
their guy down.
Right.
Potentially fake
Sorry,
memo?
what?
You mean you didn't read that potentially fake memo that went out?
Oh,
I'm just kidding.
No.
I'm kidding.
Like, no, you're good.
So what is?
I haven't seen anything like that at all, actually.
Oh.
Do you have a sense
mostly
of?
We're just trying to get people to vote for Bernie on the second ballot if their person's not viable.
When you knock
Sorry, Sam, go ahead.
When you knock on the door, do you have any sense of whose door you're knocking on insofar as like where they stand? In other words, like I know today that I'm going to be knocking on 10 doors. And according to the information I have from the campaign, 8 of them are going to be Bernie supporters, 2 are not. Do you have that level of understanding or no?
I'm sure that the like staff has more of an idea, but no, like I basically get a name, an age, and agenda.
Wow.
And basically just go from there.
What are you noticing in terms of like, do you have a sense of like X number percentage of doors I'm knocking on are supporters of Bernie, and why are, a different candidate?
Like, I would say probably like 60%. It seems like we're actually trying to hit people that are just make sure that they get to the caucus.
Right. That's usually what happens.
So, okay. So
But,
the people who
undecideds are probably 30%, and then the smaller candidates would like take up the other percentages.
Interesting.
So what they probably have is
Lean Bernie or open to Bernie and Bernie supporters.
heavy Bernie to remind them to get out to vote. You need that solid base.
Yeah, probably.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Of course, I don't have any information, like access to any of that information, as I'm sure Nomiki knows. I'm just.
So how
I'm
long
just
are
the
you in
door knocker.
Iowa for, Dale?
Yeah.
How long are you there?
Sorry, what was your question?
How long are you going to be there?
I'm here till the caucus. I took 2 weeks off of work.
So great.
Good for you.
And
That's
just
so great.
pulled out here to make it happen.
Where are you again in Iowa?
Des Moines.
You're in Des Moines. Oh, I love Des Moines.
All right. Well, thank you so
Enjoy.
much for calling in.
Hey,
What are you
Sam,
going to be?
real quick.
Yeah?
Oh, I had one other thing to say. Yeah. So my Twitter handle is Rocky Mountain Progressive, and I was in the front row in Perry, Iowa, yesterday morning.
So cool.
Uh-huh.
And you can see me in my red sweatshirt in the background of the
awesome.
of the town hall.
All right. Well, check it out.
So,
well, let me ask you a question. What are you going to be doing on caucus day?
Like in the morning, we're going to be like running around some more, and then I have a spot, the precinct spot, and I was just going to go and check it out and see what's going on. And
What time does that start? What time does the actual caucusing start?
6:30. We want people there at 6:30. Doors open, and then doors open at 6:30. I think they said that they close the doors at 7.
They do.
But get there early.
Get there early, everybody.
Do you want to?
And get some.
We're going to probably be on air. Do you want to call in at some time?
Yeah. I can call in again.
All right. We'll keep an eye out for you. Call in during that day. That would be great.
And then I'm going to go back to Colorado and knock doors there.
Sweet.
Until Super Tuesday. Last thing is Andrew Romanoff is running against Hickenlooper in the primary, which isn't actually till June for the Senate. And I just wanted to shout him out.
I'm trying to get Romanoff on for Ring of Fire, and we'll probably play it on this program as well. But appreciate the call, man. Thanks so much.
It's awesome. Keep up the great work.
Yeah, bro.
Right,
Have a good
bye-bye.
day.
Bye.
Yeah, let's go.
It's awesome.
Awesome.
Oh my gosh, people who give up 2 weeks. Oh,
Yeah, that's great. Calling from a 210 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
And Sam, this is John from San Antonio.
John from San Antonio. How are you, sir? Thank you for calling in so quickly. We got 35 callers. It's on the top.
All right, there's a tweet from Bernie yesterday. It says, polls are one thing, getting out the vote is something else. We need all the help we can get to make sure the movement is successful. Sign up to knock doors in early states. So here's my comment. We're a week away from the Iowa caucus, and I want to thank all the Bernie supporters who knocked on doors, made phone calls, and contributed to the campaign. Keep the passion up and let's elect the candidates committed to creating real change in this country. So Bernie Sanders is now the favorite in British betting markets and on Predicted and PredictWise to win the Democratic nomination. There are 4 polls released in Iowa over the weekend, and Bernie is leading in 3 of them. In an average of polls going back 2 weeks, Bernie leads with 25%, Biden gets 22%, Buttigieg at 17%, and Warren's at 14%, below the viability threshold of 15%. She doesn't reach that total. She is not eligible for statewide delegates, which comprise 34% of all delegates. Since 66% of all delegates allocated by Congress are allocated by congressional districts, it is good to see that the Emerson poll divided their sample into congressional districts. The Siena poll, which is a much better poll, divided the sections that don't exactly poll congressional districts, but instead have 4 areas: Metro Des Moines, which covers 3/4 of District 3, Western, which covers District 3 and all of District 4, and Eastern cities, which cover District 1 and 2. Emerson College has always had favorable polls for Bernie, and I'll say I was a little skeptical of this poll because it has Klobuchar ahead of Buttigieg and Warren, which is a complete outlier. The Emerson poll has results in congressional districts, and I converted them into delegates, with Bernie receiving 22 delegates, Biden 17, and Klobuchar 2. I still think Buttigieg will receive delegates statewide and in District 1 and 2. Will Buttigieg and Warren receive delegates in District 4 is the big question. That's Steve King's district. Emerson has Bernie getting 39% of the vote in that district, while Biden has 18. My new delegate estimates has Bernie at 18 delegates, Biden at 14, Buttigieg at 7, and Warren at 2. Nate Cohn had some tweets that I would like to point out. He says, in our poll, as he's talking about the Siena poll, the voters who say they'll caucus look nothing like the voters who have told us they'll vote in the prior 100 time Siena polls. In most of our midterm polls and presidential polls in 2016, the share of the people over 65 who say they're likely to vote has been higher than the share of the 18 to 29-year-olds who say the same thing. In the Iowa Democratic Caucus, it's the other way around. In the polls released in October and January, 18 to 29-year-olds.
Hold on. John, without reading all of Nate's tweets, let me just ask you. So is he saying that the polling that they're getting back in terms of who's anticipating caucusing is radically different than it has been in the past?
Yeah, it's exactly what he's saying. Okay. He's saying that the 18 to 29-year-olds are higher than the 65 and older.
So we have no way of knowing if what the relationship is between them saying they're going to poll, going to caucus, and them actually doing it when the results of that question are like this. In other words, we know in the past when they say, I'm not going, that they don't go. But we don't really have anything to sort of compare because we've never seen this many responses from people at this age that they will be going. We've never seen that before, so we can't really assess how much faith we should have in their proclamation that they are going to caucus. But it is a sign, at the very least, that we could see a radically different electorate in the Iowa caucus. And we should also say that demographically, things have really changed there over the past 20 years in Iowa, both in terms of like Latinos, in terms of people of color, broadly speaking, that Iowa is a
right.
It's a different place than it was 20 years ago.
And just real quick, these people who are now saying these unrecognized polled people are also people that are harder to reach with polls. So most likely they're underestimated.
I mean, that's going to be the big test, right, John? And John, we'll be in touch about Monday too, because we're still working out our details. But John is going to join us for our coverage on Monday.
Cool.
Because, well, I think John's already established why, right, John?
I hope so. Yeah, I mean, I got a little bit of a disagreement with you about the polling situation. I agree that polls are hard to reach the people, or at least it's harder for them in a financial sense because they just have to spend more money to eventually get the people to pick up their smartphones. But I mean, if you see, what's been happening in these latest polls, and you can also see it in any internet poll because they're not dependent on people picking up their phone, which favor Bernie much more than usually phone polls. But what you're seeing in phone polls is that Bernie's doing really well. And also there was also a poll that came out that just polled Iowans age 18 to 39. This is put together by Suffolk University and released just last Friday, and they said that 35% of Iowa voters aged 18 to 29 that they surveyed said that it was extremely likely that they were going to caucus. So I mean, they said that 11% the last time had, that's what they estimate. I think those numbers are actually higher. I mean, lower.
That's what I was saying. Is that they're underestimated as young people.
Yeah, that's what we've been saying. Is that if Bernie's theory is correct, we will necessarily not see these people show up in the polls because his theory is that I'm going to get low propensity voters to come out, and pollsters use past data as a way of assessing what their pool is going to look like that they're going to draw from and count. So, but we'll see. John, appreciate the call.
Well, not
what? What?
All right.
Well,
I mean, not all pollsters do it. That was on the. That's what Cohn was saying. He was saying the pollsters that use high propensity, models have Biden winning, but the ones that actually just call people, just flat out, just use registered voters and let them tell you. And that's the way Ann Seltzer does it. That's the way Siena does it, which are the top polls say just the opposite, that Bernie is turning out young voters. So that's what I'm saying, that they're saying, the polling is saying that young people are going to turn out, and that's why Bernie has the lead. And also he's doing much better in the 64-year-old category also.
All right. Well, we'll check it out. We'll see. I appreciate it. So I guess the bottom line is, according to John, is that we're going to find out if those pollsters who use their high propensity voter models are right in being skeptical of those people who say I'm coming out to vote or not.
You know what I think might happen? Maybe I'm crazy, and this doesn't usually happen in a primary. It's more of a general issue. I think that you're going to find probably Warren supporters, maybe even some Biden supporters who had been polled saying, yes, I'm supporting Warren or Biden, coming out, and once they're voting in the privacy of, well, actually it's an Iowa caucus, so it's not necessarily that way, but that they will vote for Bernie. I think that there's going to be, maybe not for Iowa, for New Hampshire more, you're going to see a little bit of a shift. It'll be hard to gauge, but...
So you're saying that there's like a Doug Wilder effect?
Yes, exactly.
Well, if he keeps going in the direction that he has been, that makes sense.
Well, I know people. I mean, listen, I have friends. I have my own situation. But there are loyal Democratic Party people who are Hillary Clinton supporters, who are high net worth, who have said that they were disgusted by what happened with Warren, and they're feminists who are afraid to publicly say, I want to support Bernie Sanders. I can count like maybe 5 or 6 people in like the DNC class, not DNC members, that feel like there's public pressure for them not to support Bernie publicly.
Interesting. Well, I'll tell you, they're not the only ones. This is really sad. Can we put this graphic of apparently Ben Shapiro has decided that somebody's canceled. And so it's sort of what you're talking about, Nomi. There are people who are nervous about saying that they support Bernie Sanders because they will be sort of excommunicated. And well, here is Ben Shapiro saying that Joe Rogan has been canceled because he came out and said that he is planning on voting for Bernie Sanders. I mean, this whole Joe Rogan thing it's fascinating how you could like if you were doing a graduate studies in politics, like you could come up with about 14 different theses on this that would all be sort of interesting to explore. Like one, why was there so much attention paid to this? And by the literati, when I don't think the overwhelming majority of people have a clue as to who, Joe Rogan is. He's huge on YouTube. And
it's definitely an elite discourse, shall we say.
Yeah. I mean, an elite insofar as it's like knowledge of politics. I don't think it's just a question of like, sort of the economic.
I mean, I
elite.
include myself in that because I spend too much time on Twitter.
Right. It is.
Absolutely. I can't stand Joe Rogan. I will say straight up, I tried so hard. I listened to Bernie's interview, Kyle Kalinski's interview. Those are great. After that, I was like, this is painful. I literally cannot stand listening to this man. But that doesn't mean we don't recognize his
here's
existence.
I think, right. The controversial part, it seems to me, is the campaign itself.
Yeah.
Making a video about him and putting it out on there. I mean, it's one thing to say we got endorsed by Joe Rogan. It's another to sort of like make a video about it. Now,
it was a little aggrandizing towards Joe Rogan.
I mean, yes. And I think that to the extent that there's any controversy, I think it's...
But it got played out in the press for a lot. I mean, if you didn't see the video, you saw the news.
Yeah.
And suddenly people go, oh, Joe Rogan. The people who you need saw that. And that cancels out the idiots on Twitter and the people who are never going to support Bernie Sanders.
The people whose the name Joe Rogan means something to them who hadn't maybe caught that. I also
the
think
ultimate effect was keeping it on the Twitter trends for like way more days than it usually would have.
I also think, frankly, this is my theory, and I have spoken to no one about this, that part of it was like, let's just lock him in.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, because he never actually endorsed.
He just said, I'm going to vote for Bernie. I'm probably going to vote for Bernie. And
Tack Tulsi around there right after.
Yeah, it's like I think to a certain extent, it was like, let's lock him in.
Yeah.
And,
Totally.
I know.
Oh, Cornel West. Can I make a similar analysis? During my campaign, I was, asking all of basically everybody for favors and like you, asking folks for endorsements. And I had emailed Cornel West to do an event and he goes, oh, but I'm fully supportive of your campaign in the email. And I'm like, that's an endorsement. I'll take that.
Right. So I think like that is part of the reason why they do it. And I think the cost was that people were like, there's a small percentage. Now, with that said, we've talked about Joe Rogan on this program ad nauseum, and I think of the people of in that arena, I think that we've felt like he can be helpful and is sort of not has not fully formed in terms of his perspectives. I don't think he's ever going to be somebody who is going to be, in my estimation, sufficiently sensitive to a whole myriad of issues.
Yeah, he has a pattern. He said racist stuff. He said sexist stuff. He said transphobic stuff very recently.
He's a friend of Jordan Peterson.
And he's friends with Jordan Peterson. He argued against giving transition care to transgender kids. Like, he's got some problematic opinions.
Without a doubt.
History shows that there can be issues when you pander to a bigoted group of people in order to win. And then you end up bargaining away a whole lot of things that working class people need. We saw it in the New Deal. Malika Jabali had a very good thread on that. I probably wouldn't have elevated his endorsement if I were them, but I think the real place where you should draw the line is in making any concessions on policy.
That's right.
And the Bernie campaign has not done that.
Well, the big problem is, and yes, nobody did any, there was no pandering to get his endorsement. I think they were completely surprised by it as well, frankly. Although, they went on to the show, which makes sense.
Which every other candidate attempted to do.
We don't know if that's the case.
I think
the candidates,
Rogan said
it. The candidates deny it.
Elevating the Joe Rogan video is an attempt to pander to Joe Rogan's viewership, I think.
I agree. And I would just say, hold on, just in terms of like the invites, if I'm the Warren campaign and I know that somebody sent an email to Joe Rogan, can Warren be on? I would be very nervous about saying that. Like, I wouldn't think that he's going to hesitate to put it out there. So it's conceivable that like he says they wanted to come on. Maybe it was, I don't know how.
Well, you heard the clip, right? He didn't say this after the pushback. He said this before all of this, saying that they've been calling. It was on the Kyle Kalinske.
I know.
Okay.
I know. That doesn't mean it's true.
All right.
It's not. Let me put it this way. The idea that somebody on YouTube says something to make them sound like more aggrandizing is not hard for me to believe.
Yeah. He's on a lot of steroids.
If there was an email, hi, I'm Joe Stevens from the Warren campaign or the Biden campaign, and I was Joe Rogan, guess what I would do?
Yeah.
But maybe it'll come out later. Who knows? But the point being that that Jamie's point is most salient. Is like, what are the implications if the theory is that Bernie Sanders is out there trying to create a new electorate, right? A new Democratic coalition that is going to have implications in terms of the ability to pass Medicare for all, for instance. What happens when they come with their own sort of set of like, we don't want transgender bathrooms or whatever it is. I mean, I'm just making this up. But
they don't choose those issues first. I mean, that I think is the ultimate, when you're polling people, the people who choose, those are the evangelicals, right? The no transgender bathroom people.
I'm just using that as an example.
But they're doing these are the economics first voters.
I think the idea with Joe Rogan's listenership is that there is enough of them who, like Joe Rogan, frankly, have a sort of rather incoherent sort of like, at least incoherent in the context of like of policy and sometimes in terms of outcomes.
A lot of them are very apolitical. They just don't think politics are relevant to their lives. They're like disaffected young men, which is exactly who Bernie needs to get to vote for him.
I mean, listen, I'm not going to demonize his listeners at all. I think that there are people who challenge, he talks about the military industrial complex, and that's an issue for a lot of voters who support Tulsi Gabbard. And she has a large young man support, disaffected voters. We need that. But my concern, and I did a Twitter storm on this as many others did, is when the Democratic literati or whatever, the establishment, the Neurotandons, criticize Bernie for attracting what they deem as conservative, yet they have no problem with the David Frums of the world and Henry Kissinger and dropping, drone drops on children or whatever. So it's like,
this is bad faith criticism for sure.
Bad faith criticism.
All of the Democrats criticizing Bernie for this, who are to the right of him, need to get their own house in order.
Well, but it's not even just that. It's like, what I want to reinforce is, you're choosing the rich conservatives over the poor conservatives.
Well, it's also, I just don't think that the thing is that I think that the definitions of this is one of those situations where the definition of what conservative means something different.
Right.
Yeah. For these different sets of groups of people, like multiple. I think like you could say clearly to the right on the spectrum of a lot of these things. But
and a lot of what passes for social conservatism is really people just being ignorant and not having thought that much about these issues. Like, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're gonna always support a transgender bathroom bill or whatever. Like, this is the idea behind having these, massive class-based populist programs be the tip of the spear. Bring people in and say, also, we won't brook any nonsense when it comes to women's rights, when it comes to trans rights. And 9 times out of 10, when you explain it to people in a way that makes sense, or they actually talk to a trans person and they're humanized to them, they're like, oh yeah, I'm sorry, I didn't realize.
What's interesting is that, and I don't know if this is true, but I saw someone claim that Rogan was deleting tweets that were insensitive or whatnot. And deleting.
Okay, yeah.
And if that's the case, that's
progress.
That validates that. That validates that. I mean, that validates that theory. So
people should be given the chance to change and evolve for sure.
I mean, that's the Cenk Uygur.
But I also think that.
But you also got to hold them accountable.
I also think too that you need to make an assessment as to like what is the what's the likelihood, and I think, to a certain extent, at least, obviously for years prior to this endorsement, I think like, the general gist around here has been that Rogan is, I don't know that he's going to be marching at the Women's March anytime soon, but that I think he is, sort of his audience is slightly up for grabs in terms of like ideological, and where they would land ultimately. And I think maybe to a certain extent he is too. I can tell you that, my experience of him 30 some odd years ago in comic clubs, he's come a little bit of way. So
with that being back to your political science assessment, At the end of the day, let's just recognize what their strategy here was. It's not that they actually care. It's not that they have some sort of moral compass, the people criticizing Bernie for this. It's that they are trying to fragment. I mean, and to be fair, Bernie has actually rolled over on some things in which they attack Bernie for XYZ, and they're trying to fragment his support. You know, they don't want him to build a coalition, a new Democratic coalition, because that's dangerous in this electorate. That's dangerous against Trump. And so they're trying to create this identity politics game that they've been doing all along, in which pitting people against each other on the left, because they know that there are people on Bernie's left who will find this repulsive, and they did come out and say so, and demand that Bernie, apologize. And Bernie has apologized several times, with the Zephyr Teachout. I think he's got to stop doing that, because that's what they want him to do.
I think most people who are actually on the left have a fairly nuanced position on this. I mean, I've spoken to some transgender people who are in DSA with me.
Well, they're in DSA, so
like, yeah, I'm glad that Joe Rogan endorsed Bernie. I want Bernie to win. I want Medicare for all. I want it to include transition care. I'm having trouble affording transition care right now. At the same time, we want a movement that is inclusive of everyone and doesn't throw anyone under the bus. And it's like a very delicate dance to be doing, but they still support Bernie.
Well, I think there can be, I think there can be, and there is sincere concern about it. And but I also think that like someone like, obviously like Neera Tanden is trying to exploit it. And, that's what politicking is on some level. They're trying to keep basically second choice basically people from staying away from him, and
I would never defend people like Neera Tanden. Just want to make that clear.
Right. And
she's not in DSA. She's not the one you're talking about.
Yeah.
They're trying to prevent second choicers to going to Sanders. Right. I think on some level, I disagree with you with the apologies, because my sense is that they are being very strategic about where they're apologizing, and so it's basically putting out this thing of like, I'm reasonable enough to apologize and recognize there are times where I get things wrong.
Yeah.
Which makes it a harder argument that he's just being stubborn, right? Like, you got to look at what he perceives as his negatives and what other people perceive as his negatives.
But sometimes they don't think before they do things, like endorsing Cenk Uygur. I mean, that was, I love Cenk. Let me just make that very clear. It's that they knew going in.
The risk reward was not, the risk reward is not great.
Yeah. They knew going in what would have happened. It's and then they just, pulled back the endorsement. That's a lack of coherent strategy.
That, I think, is more of a mistake. The apologizing in the instance of the Zephyr Teachout thing, I don't think that was a plan, but I think that, like, at the end of the day, the story is out there, and
I don't know if it was like Joe Scarborough or Bill Maher. Someone's like, why is Bernie apologizing for this? And that's like the best case scenario for that, because then Bernie looks gracious, and then other people get to continue the ball down the field.
Right. I mean, I think there's some value in that. We got a lot of people hanging on the phone.
But wait, what about Ben Shapiro? Were you going to play? Did he talk in a video?
No,
it was just that tweet.
Yeah.
Oh, well then, never mind.
Calling from a 727 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Hey, my name's Sean. I'm calling from Tampa.
Sean from Tampa, what's on your mind?
Hey, I don't really have a question or anything. I just kind of wanted to share my own kind of personal success with converting some of my family members into voting for Bernie.
Sure.
My brother was, for the longest time, he was like a staunch libertarian, like Ayn Rand's his favorite person, played BioShock for 50 years, and he loved it. And then over the course of like 2 or 3 years, they kept throwing like, oh, well, Medicare for all, like, people need that. Like, it's not just us. Like, other people need this help too, and they can pay for it. It's like, yeah, but what about the business? Like, well, what about the businesses? They can pay for people's health care now. Why can't they pay for everyone's health care? And over the years, he came, and now both of us will attack my father on Medicare for all now. My brother's definitely voting for Bernie, and my sister's definitely voting for Bernie. So to all people out there who feel like their family is so far away from being able to be turned just because they have a set ideology already, remember they're your family and they trust you, or they should trust you, so they should trust your opinion. And if you can help them see a better opinion for the world, then you're the number one person to help them change their opinion.
Great story. Appreciate the call.
My family does
Also,
not trust me, but
sorry.
I'm glad that yours does.
He brings up a good point, though. When you come at it from like a business perspective, there almost always is like a pro small business perspective, because don't forget it's monopolies and big business that are attacking all of these. So when you say, well, how much are small businesses paying right now under Obamacare? Well, solve that. It almost always works. Maybe
All
not
right.
vote for him.
Final call of the day, folks. I'm sorry. We will take more calls tomorrow. I promise. I know I say that every time, but calling from a 302 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from? 302. Calling once, twice. 302.
Yo, Sam.
Just by the.
Hey, Sam. Sorry, I had my phone on speaker.
Who's this?
This is Will from Delaware.
Will from Delaware. You are the
calling
final
about-
caller of the day.
Yeah, I'm calling about Chris Coons and hopefully Jess too. Jess Green for Delaware.
Okay.
So Chris Coons, I don't know. Did you see the Jeff Bezos had like this giant billionaire party, invited a bunch of people out?
I was not invited, if that's what you're asking.
I think it was in New York, so I'm surprised they didn't give you the invitation.
That's pretty nuts.
Lost
Must
in
have
the
gotten
mail.
lost in the mail.
Amazon didn't deliver it.
That's right.
Yeah, right. Anyways, I was just to bring up the fact that Jess is running again, because you guys did the first half of the show, has everything to do with like who Chris Coons is pushing and the type of agenda that he has, especially when it comes from, you guys talked about pro-choice and pro-life a little bit, and it's worth remembering that Coons voted to confirm Kurt Angle, who is one of the worst of the Trump judges. And so if anybody listening wants to volunteer or donate, please go to Jess Feller.
Okay. All right. Thanks, man. You're breaking up a little bit, but I'll pick up the ball here. I interviewed Jessica Rain for Ring of Fire. And eventually we're going to play. Maybe we should just pull those and maybe drop them in occasionally, because we had a lot of great progressive candidates who were challenging. But you can go to JessForDelaware.com if you want to get involved in that race. And Chris Coons, like I say, he's going to be a problem. And
Delaware is such a small state.
It's a small state. So easy. And there's been polling that I know that has been done that says that he is vulnerable to a challenge from his left, particularly from a woman. And so it's Jess for Delaware. And there's plenty of material as to why you would vote against a Chris Coons. We played some of it over the years, and just, with the hopes that he would get a challenger. And it's there. So, all right, folks, that's all our show for today. Nomiki, thank you so much for joining us. See you tomorrow.
It might take all the strength I got to get to where I want, but I know somehow I'm gonna get there. I wasn't looking when I just got caught between the truth and the light bulb, but finding out won't make me feel any better. Yeah, I know the clock is ticking, but the meds are gonna kick in, and my pilot light shining bright. I guess somewhere the choice was made for the option where you don't get paid, for the road that bends before it finally breaks you. I guess somehow I lost my drive between the 101 and the 5. Do you know how far the detour takes you? Yeah.